microphone.
Morning. Call the meeting of the Texas Real Estate Commission joint meeting to order at 10:02. Commissioner Wycliffe.
Good morning. The time is 2 minutes after 10, and we will call the Texas Appraiser Licensing and Certification Board to order.
Before we do the pledges of allegiance, I would tell you that the microphones that they had to bring in for some of you for this meeting do not indicate whether they are on or not. So if you speak and you suddenly get a high sign from one of us, that means you need to push your button. We might have to remind you of that. Okay? So let's all rise, and Jamie and I will do the pledges with you.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Texas flag.
Honor the Texas flag. I pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state under God, one and indivisible.
A call for the roll call of the Texas Real Estate Commission. Here.
Present. TJ Turner.
Here.
Jan Miller. Bob Leonard. Here. Brady Stevens. Here. Charles Westcott. Here. Laura Wilkinson. Here.
Thank you. We'll do that next. We're going to excuse after she calls roll.
We'll go ahead and ask for a roll call for the Texas Appraiser Licensing and Certification Board.
Chair Jamie Wycliffe.
Present.
Martha Gale Reed. Westford Renfro.
Present.
Doug Black. Lance Bolton.
Present.
Jim Jeffries. Tony Pena.
Present.
Alex Holster.
Present.
Jim Stevens.
Present.
I call for a motion for the excused absence of Michael Williams.
Madam Chair, so moved.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
And opposed, no. Motion carries.
And we will also call for a motion. I want you to be aware that our board members, Black and Jeffries, both send their regrets. They did not have this emergency meeting on their schedules. One is in out of state, and the other is on business that was unavoidable. So I would entertain a motion to excuse those absences.
So move. A second.
A motion, was that Mr. Pena? Yes. From Mr. Pena, and a second from Mr. Bolton. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion passes unanimously.
For the audience, this is a working meeting of the Commission and the Board to prepare an agency response to the Sunset Staff Report. There will be no public comments taken at this meeting. No public comments will be taken. Thank you for your attendance. I believe Chairman Wycliffe and I both have a little bit of opening remarks we'd like to make before we begin this meeting. So I take privilege. Mr. Vice Chairman Arriaga, Mr. Secretary Turner, and Commissioners, Madam Chairman Wycliffe, and board members, I want to say, first of all, thank you all for putting your lives on hold to read the Sunset Report once or twice, or maybe 6 times, and for being willing to come to Austin for a special meeting to discuss this report and hopefully make a response. All of you made a big commitment to the people of Texas when you said yes to serve in this capacity, and I thank you for that. I also want to thank the Sunset staff because I believe that their job is a very thankless one, because I know how I felt about their work, and I know they worked hard. Our only business today is discussion and possible action on a response to the Sunset Advisory Commission's staff report. I hope you have all taken a few moments to review the procedural information that was given to you by General Counsel of the Commission. With the assistance of the attorneys, I believe all of you and Chairman Wycliffe and I will survive this day. I have a few more comments. I'm a native Texan, and that is something I am very proud of. And even if you are a Texan by choice, you know that Texas is different than other places. Texas is a place, and that it is also a state of mind. which translates for me into what works in other places may not work here, and what works in other regulatory environments may not be best for the Commission or the Board. We regulate two of the industries whose license holders assist consumers generally in the largest investment they will ever make in their lives. That's different, and how we regulate it is different. Not wrong, just different. Yesterday, I was greatly blessed to spend a little time with Governor Abbott and then hear him speak to a gathering here in Austin. He told the group that he's proud to be governor of the #1 state in America for creating jobs. And he's also proud to be the governor of the state whose gross domestic product is greater than the country of Canada or the country of Australia or Russia. He has big plans for Texas to continue this robust business climate. A lot is at stake in our economy, and a lot is at stake in our decisions today, how to best regulate our license holders. I don't agree with the Sunset Report, which marks the Commission and the Board as failing to oversee staff. This week, in order to prepare for this meeting properly, I watched every Commission meeting since August of 2014. That was tough. And on those meetings, I have heard all of these commissioners and the ones who have retired ask probing questions of staff to clarify issues of all concerns, not just about communications or facilities, about all questions, all issues raised. Because you were respectful of each other's time, no one had a tendency to repeat the question. Yet no question was left unasked, and no question was left unanswered. I take personal issue with the characterization that we as regulators did not take customer service issues seriously. As the record shows, at nearly every meeting since August of 2014, commissioners have questioned staff about communications concerns. Do we have and have we had communications issues? Absolutely. We do, and we have had. But the record shows the continuous efforts on the part of the staff to improve and put in place measures to improve communications with license holders and consumers. Hindsight is, of course, 20/20, and now we know that what we were doing was not enough. Those of you with whom I serve on the Commission are dedicated to the people of Texas, and there's not one chance, if we had actually known that a more aggressive approach was merited, that we wouldn't have just requested it, we would have demanded it. Implying that we only took action on measures to improve communication issues after Sunset Review is just plain wrong. Watch the meetings. Be reminded that in August of 2014, Commissioner Alley was pleased with the new hires and efforts being made to improve communication. In February of 2015, Ms. DeAnda reported, quote, "We are always searching for ways to reduce hold time and have restructured call times and staffing available." Watch the meetings. The list goes on every time. This report ignores the fact that this body created a committee of Commissioners Alley, Arriaga, and Hensley, and Board Member Patton in 2014 to work with the Facilities Commission to consider the possibility of a building, This building reserve was created after all of our obligations were met as a part of the long-term strategic plan to achieve long-term occupancy expense reduction. Suggesting that we simply intentionally ignored communication to build a building fund is not true. We have done so many things well because of your involvement and the involvement of those who came before us. We have never neglected our mission to safeguard the public interest, to protect the consumers of real estate services, and facilitate economic growth and opportunity across Texas. I'm proud to be a Texan. I'm proud to serve with each of you. Chairman Wycliffe.
Thank you. And thank you for your heartfelt and sincere comments. I, too, want to pause for a brief moment and appreciate the continued commitment of this board and commission members who volunteer their time to serve this great state of Texas, its industry license holders, and the public. I am always grateful to serve with the committed, competent, and busy individuals that are also appointed to serve in these volunteer positions. We're assembled today to prepare a joint response to the preliminary findings of the Sunset staff. While the report in some aspects does not completely accurately reflect the actions of the TALCB, it does and has provided a platform to allow our board and the TREC Commission to continue to improve, and I truly believe we always welcome those opportunities. To my board, I want to say, this process is new to me and to each of you. As with anything new, I'm nervous about what is expected and how to properly engage in the process. I want to encourage each of you to be brave with me today, to give your thoughts, your mindful and helpful comments. At the end of this day, in my opinion, what's most important is that your voice was a part of the process. I'd also like to remind us all, everybody here today, that the Sunset staff has obviously conducted extensive research and analysis with the goal not only of evaluating our performance, but also to identify improvements to our agency as a whole. I also want to remind the board and commission members and the public that this report is in an evaluation stage. I'm hopeful that the additional data that we're able to assemble and will complete today will have meaningful impact on a final report. As I review the report, I want to encourage my board that your input is critical. I'm going to remind you of that today. I know when I reviewed the report, words like failed to adjust quickly and decisively to growth in the industry and demands on the agency, ultimately to the detriment of the license holders, created an emotional response in me. They're difficult for me because from the beginning they speak directly to what I struggle with when I serve in a role like this. Unlike my private enterprise, and those operated by several of our commission and board members, I cannot individually fix the problem. I can't do it quickly. It concerns me that the public and the stakeholders that may read this report in its preliminary state may not understand the process that must be followed to solve a problem at this level. There is a process and a reason for the steps that are required to make the decisions, and consequently it slows the solution from what we individually are accustomed to. I encourage you to consider how we as a collective group can either become better informed of the processes available to us or explore new ways to have our ideas, concerns, and policies implemented in the most efficient path. Staff's always been responsive to our ideas, so let's continue to grow and learn to implement them in a new way. While I understand the intent of the report is to identify shortcomings, I am disappointed that there appears to be no place in this report to speak to the significant and extensive steps this agency has taken over the last several years that have made very positive improvements in this organization and in the service to those we serve. That being said, I do embrace and welcome several of the recommendations. I appreciate the staff working hard to assemble the information that allows us to be in a position to respond efficiently, and I look forward to your individual comments to round out the collective agency response. I am confident that my board will continue to rise to the occasion, and with thoughtful assemblage of information from our staff, we will continue to work hard to make things even better for the license holders and the consumers in the great state of Texas. Today's a tough day. We've got a lot of hard work ahead of us. I'm lucky I've got you guys helping us out. I'm confident that we're going to have good results, and I'm ready to get engaged in the process.
Very well said, Chairman Wycliffe. It's the time for me to ask if any of our commission members have legal questions regarding this report. And it's not the time to make them, it's just the time to tell me if you have them, because then we will go into executive session.
Madam Chair.
Yes, sir.
I'd like to take the opportunity to thank you both for your opening comments. And I'd like to accept Madam Chair Wycliffe's recommendation that we can speak up. And with your permission, if you allow us, I'd like to go around the table and see, especially starting with me, how we feel about this report. And if you permit me, is that possible?
General Counsel.
We can do that when we get to each agenda item.
I would like,
Beginning of the agenda item.
with all due respect, Madam Chair, I think this is what has led to the communication problems we had and the recommendations and the concerns that the Sunset has. For some reason, somehow, sometimes I feel that I'm relegated to a back seat. I cannot speak up because there are certain rules we got to follow. And those rules, as long as we're not breaking them, we need to follow. Would there be a possibility to maybe bend those rules and start discussion on how we feel overall about the report?
We can do that when we get to the agenda item. So when we get to the agenda item, before we start voting on all of them, then it would be appropriate.
I think he's asking, can each person make a short comment about how they feel about the report as a whole? Is that what you're asking?
Absolutely.
Okay.
It's the most important part. If there's any,
Yeah, and I think you can. It's just we haven't opened that agenda item yet.
Oh, okay. You're right.
when will we open the agenda?
When we come back from executive session.
I think it's
Well, you
important.
actually, you open the agenda item,
Okay?
and then they could make comments if they want,
And then we can go
and
on
then we can
exec-
go into executive
Okay,
session.
well then, I will call for agenda item, whatever it is. Do I need to let Jamie ask her question about going into executive session?
You have to open the agenda item before we go into executive session anyway, so.
Okay, well
So
then I'll
open the agenda item.
Agenda item 3 for discussion and possible action regarding the agency's response to Sunset Commission staff report. If you'll hold on just a minute, Jamie's got to do the same thing.
Yes, and we will also, on behalf of the TALCB, open discussion and possible action regarding the agency's response to the Sunset staff report.
And then you did ask the question, so you might want to answer, does anybody want to go into executive
Does
session?
anyone want to go into executive
For
session?
legal questions of counsel.
Does anyone wish
Before
to
we
do
take
that
vote.
before we make comments?
Yes, I would like to.
You would like to?
Yes.
Okay,
I would too.
okay.
Madam Chair, I would like to be against that recommendation for one simple reason, board member, that is to discuss overall before we all begin where we stand in reading the report. And I'm moved that how do we vote on that? I prefer to do the discussion. No big deal, it's going to be done. The problem is that we need to be all on the same page. The report was written to all of us, and the most important part to me was that we got a symptom and a cause for a problem. We need to figure out why. And I see the responses from the staff outstanding. At the same time, I really see that we're not perfect. We're trying to be good, but still we're being chastised for something that I don't think we've done. And I think we've been chastised for something that someone feels passionately, not only the public, but the legislature that we need to be looking at. I feel that we need to speak out a bit louder, something that we're accused of not doing.
Okay, so did I hear you attempt to make a motion of some sort?
I respect the wishes of the whole, and it's not that important, just important that we communicate better, board member.
Commissioner Westcott?
Madam Chair, I'd like to move that we move to executive session to discuss some of the legal questions that commissioners may have.
Is that an appropriate motion? Is there a second?
Madam Chair, I also do have a comment before we go into executive session.
Okay, I need to seek a second on that, and then we can see if you have a comment on that. Do I have a second for going into executive session?
Second.
Okay. Do you have a comment on going into executive session?
Actually, it's on the procedures to follow during this meeting.
Okay. You have a
we were
procedural question? A procedural question? Is that what you have?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
On dissents, when we have had meetings or in any legal procedure and we're here to follow law, all dissents are part of a report. And during the procedures which I read from Ms. Lewis, the dissents are to be written if requested only. And I believe that we should send our report without omissions, not just what fits what we're here to discuss that is pro, but everything, which I think that we owe it to the people of Texas. And another thing is, when we send communications to all commissioners, we are always told to not communicate with each other, which is fine. But I think that we also need to be open about what a quorum is. And I'm going to ask Ms. Lewis, what is a quorum for our commission?
It's a majority of the members,
Which is how many?
which is 5.
Yes, ma'am. And I think that we should remind the commissioners every time that we send communication that they may communicate, but just not 5 because that conforms a walking quorum. But I think that part of our job with the state of Texas is to make sure that we do it right. And part of it is not just to communicate with the people of Texas, but also there may be a question with each other, if ever. And if that's the case, I don't think that the people should feel like they cannot communicate with each other, because that is what is causing today's problem. And I'm grateful to be a part of the state of Texas, and I'm grateful to serve. But I think that we should remember those that have served before us in every which way to make the state of Texas what we are today and what we enjoy, and that we're here to fight, to preserve what we have today, and to make it greater. And part of it is to have the courage to do the right thing, not what we think is the right thing, And for that, I thank you.
Is there any other person who wishes to make a comment on the motion, which is to go into executive session?
I have a question on the motion.
Okay.
Why do we need to go into executive session for legal concerns? It's supposed to be a public hearing responding to the report.
We had 2 commissioners who had requested it.
Commissioner Arriaga, I would just ask you, do you feel like you have a full legal grasp of all the legal issues surrounding this report and its implications, and the difference between the different types of SDSI agencies and potentially what the consequences are to this agency? Do you feel like you have a firm grasp of all those? I'm an attorney. I don't feel like I have a firm grasp of all those. So with respect, I would like to have the opinion of counsel on that.
I have a grasp. I have inquired, I have read my reports, and I'm ready to talk about it in public. I think that's our duty.
Yeah, and I will just say that under the Open Meetings Act, the commission members have a right to meet with counsel for legal questions. It is not a forum where we're going to talk about and decide on any of the issues, but if they have specific questions, they have a right to be fully prepared before they come in to have their public discussion and vote.
Point well taken. Sometimes we sort of skirt around the issues of talking more than just the legal issues. And I question and also plead to you that you keep us online. And let's keep it as short as possible. The public needs to hear what we're doing or not doing.
Agree with that.
Madam Chair, I have a point of order. Okay. I'm just going to try and get us back on track here if I can. Commissioner Arriaga made a request, as I understand it, for any of the commission or board members who have comments generally, perhaps such as those that you delivered a second ago, whether or not we would have the opportunity to express those views or make some remarks about the report overall. And the response from council was we could once we open the agenda item. Okay. We opened the agenda item, but then we had a motion to go into executive session. So that's the motion that's on the table, correct? That's correct. But I do understand also that Commissioner Arriaga's request for time to speak generally for those of us who would like to was well taken. The only question now, I believe, is whether or not we're doing that before we go into executive session or afterwards. Is that right?
It's my call. Great. Then let's let anybody who wants to talk. You got something to say?
Commissioner Arriaga?
Yes, I have a question, and Commissioner, I've been asked, do I have a grasp? I know we all do. We spend a lot of time and effort making sure that we understand the game and protect the public, but at the same time, do our job in making sure that we move forward in the right direction. We've been chastised publicly. Does not feel good. Everybody got to see the report, and people would ask, hey, how come you're not doing your job? Well, I think we have, but there's a culture sometimes that we do not see, Madam Chair, and that is that sometimes because the rules we have to follow, we have to, and the recommendations done by staff, I really believe that sometimes staff gives us information that might not be completely correct. When we got our indoctrination, orientation, and I'm sure the board members did the same thing, I don't think we were totally told how a semi-independent group needs to react. I know I wasn't, because I wasn't at the time. It was not there. I guess I came on in 2009. we have failed in communicating, Mr. Olmixon. We have failed in making sure that we translate everything openly. I have some cases I can quote that the Sunset Commission is correct. It is. And I know being defensive is the first step because it hurts us. But as we go line by line, I will give you some more details of what I mean. But thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Is there any other commissioner who wishes to make a comment? Mr. Turner?
Sure. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll try to be respectful of everyone's time. I think I had the same initial reaction to the report that probably most of us did, which was, I guess for me, it was more a sense of embarrassment and a sense of having failed to do my job, if anything, or at least being told I had, and then some time for self-reflection. But I think that now that we've all been through that, at the risk of giving a pep talk here, the Sunset Commission has shined a light on issues that for the most part we all knew we had, that we were already working on. That's one thing that I do take issue with. I think that we were, if we're guilty of anything, it's lack of efficiency and expediency, which I think has been a plague of bureaucracies since the dawn of time, since people started getting together and governing. So we need to work on that, absolutely. But I would really just encourage all of us today to take the time to look at this as a constructive exercise, be appreciative of the opportunity to have been examined in this level of detail, and let's take this opportunity to make our agencies better. I think that we can take advantage of this and turn this into a positive thing and get both our board and our commission whipped into shape. And I look forward to getting to work on that. So
Thank you.
I'd just like to try and put a little bit more positive spin on it if we can.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, I have a comment, if it's appropriate.
If you'll wait just a minute, let's make sure TREC is finished, and then I'll open the opportunity to our board.
Okay. Anyone over here? Seeing none, Commissioner Wycliffe? Chairman?
Yes. I would welcome the opportunity for any board member who would like to make general comment about the items that we are addressing.
I have a comment, and after reading the report, I do believe that the Sunset staff report does not reflect the board's concern and involvement, specifically the board's. I want to be clear how focused we've been, how we've asked questions, how we've identified the problems, and have evaluated the responses from staff. We know we have the problems. I believe we've made an attempt and continue to make an attempt to come to a positive result. I also want to thank the staff for being so detailed. And I think we all have a lot to learn as well and a lot to go forward. So, thank you.
Madam Chair.
Mr. Bolton?
I'd just like to make a few comments, and I agree with others that I've heard this morning that I was shocked and embarrassed when I read the Sunset Advisory Commission staff report, but it stung. And upon reflection, I think that they were correct about some of the things that they reported in the report. I also think that there were things that we had in progress that were not accurately reflected. I also think that this is an opportunity as a wake-up call to our board and to the staff. Is one, I'm looking to emerge from this is greater transparency between the board and the staff, greater cooperation. I'd also like for the board to reflect on why we're here. And I hope that it would refocus, re-energize our efforts and to continue the good work that we've done and to seek out the areas, whether they're in the Advisory Commission's report or not, that we know we can improve. And so I ask that the board members would take that to heart, and let's make this agency better in serving the people of Texas. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Are there other board comments?
Madam Chair, just a couple brief comments. As I read this report, and I go to a lot of professional meetings, being an appraiser that I am, I can't help but think that this agency is dealing with the results of that we live in the fastest growing state in the union right now. And I could not and cannot believe that other agencies in this state are having some outfall from that, and they have issues they have to deal with. First of all, transportation agency. You think they've solved that problem? No. So it's an outfall of the growth the state is having. I am not so surprised, but I do know we have started addressing these. Will we get there immediately? If the growth continues, this will be problems that we will be faced continually. Now, I'm not opposed to being pointed out to deficiencies we have, because I think if we believe we've handled everything and that we're good to go, then we're in trouble. We have to constantly be looking forward. Does it sting to have these pointed out in print? Yes. But we can solve these problems. I believe we have the staff to solve these problems. But I don't believe these problems were constituted by our lack of action and our decision to try to fund a building. I could spin this building as a positive. I hear countless times people have trouble locating our agency. But if it had a face, might not be the problem, okay? That's forward thinking. Is it bad? I don't think so. But it's made to look really, really bad that we did that in lieu of trying to solve the other problems that have hit us face on with the tremendous growth that this state has experienced over the last years, and by all indications is going to continue to experience. Thank you for the time.
Thank you, Mr. Renfro. Any other comments from the board? I believe we're back at your motion for executive session on your side, and then I'll ask if my group needs it.
I have a motion and a second to go into executive session. All in favor say aye.
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 And opposed, no. Chairman Wycliffe?
The Texas Appraiser Licensing and Certification Board may meet with the attorney in executive session on any item listed above as authorized by the Texas Open Meeting Act, Chapter 551 of the Texas Government Code. I'd ask, do any board members have legal questions of counsel?
Yes, I do.
Could you form that into a motion, please?
Yes, I'd motion to go into executive session.
Second.
Okay, I do have a motion and second for executive session. Is there any discussion? All those in favor? Aye. Is anyone opposed? Okay. That motion passes unanimously on behalf of the board.
Hold on. The Texas Real Estate Commission will meet in executive session on items listed on the agenda as authorized by the Texas Open Meetings Act, Chapter 551, Texas Government Code, for 45 minutes, which will be 20 minutes after 11. Is that right?
No, I'll just say, as we break, do we have locations already determined?
Yes, the
We do.
commission will meet in the room on the other side of the little cafe, and you need to call out your stuff.
Will do. The time is now 10:35, and the board will go into executive session to obtain the advice of legal counsel or discussion pending or contemplated litigation. We anticipate returning to open session in approximately 45 minutes. And board, we will assemble upstairs in the conference room.
The Texas Real Estate Commission back to order at 11:40 a.m.
And it's now 11:40, and the board is back from its executive session and reconvening in open session.
First order of our, on the commission side business, would be to call for any comments that any commissioner might have on the proposed opening comments in the staff letter.
And since it would be a joint response, I'll go ahead and open the opportunity for comment with the board as well, so we can have a concurrent conversation, and then we'll take separate motions as we go.
Sounds good. Does anyone have any comments?
Madam Chair, if
Yes,
I
sir.
might,
Commissioner Leonard?
I had one kind of overall comment that has partially, at least partially, been resolved. and that I felt the opening statement on our initial response came across as a little defensive, and there's kind of an elephant in the room here, and that is the call center and the issues that we have with communications with our license holders and the public and their ability to get through to us. And that is kind of throughout the report itself, the Sunset Report, and it's throughout our response. I thought the initial response, first couple of pages, came across as being a little, I was a little uncomfortable with it, and that it was a little, I think we need to acknowledge the issue and just go on instead of emphasizing this one issue too much. It is an issue. It's an issue we need to solve. It's an issue that has improved but still needs great improvement. Let's own it. Let's accept the criticism and go on and tone down that initial response a little bit. I believe that's been done to some extent that I was not aware of.
Okay.
I think it needs to go a little bit further.
Okay. You want to toss it and see if you have anybody?
Madam Chair, I also like to have a comment.
I understand. I thought we might go
Okay, thank you.
back and forth, back and forth.
I have a general comment, and that is as it relates, I'd like to see something in the letter, and I'm curious about the board's input on this as well. I'd like to see something in the letter earlier on about the federal regulations that we are obligated to operate under that in some cases aren't uniform to other SDSI agencies. And so that's in hopes a thought for any additional comments that the board may have, and we'll toss it back then to TREC for now. In a few minutes, we'll come back and see if the board has other comments.
Commissioner Stevens?
Madam Chair, I too would like to, I think that what we need to do is first acknowledge, I'm going to just follow up and build up on where Bob Leonard started, about where we have been. I have been serving for a little over 3 years, since 2015, and the problems with the call center existed when I came in.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that part of the problem is, like he said, acknowledging where we are and where we need to be.
Mm-hmm.
And in our industry, and we know this more than a lot of people, especially real estate agents, because we work on commission, efforts do not count, only results. And these agencies' efforts have been insufficient. And I think that I thank the Sunset staff who worked very hard, and I thank the people that came forward and spoke so that we could have what I believe are candid comments and necessary comments that needed to come from a body whose work is to tell us what they see as necessary, and for us not to be defensive, because deeds and actions speak for themselves, and just to courage up and do the right thing. So, and in this letter, unfortunately, that's not reflected. And when we started it was really like, my sense of it was general denial of a lot of the things that were said. And that's just not a good start. So let's try it again. And that's part of my concern, that later on, we are going to be asked that the executive commissions of both be in charge of deciding this. And I really believe that the whole body, which is ultimately responsible for all the decisions that we have done, it, and some of them have been good, but we have failed in many because we have surrendered the authority that the legislation gave us, and we were appointed by the governor, at least TREC, and to do our job, and that we have been surrendering that authority, but not the responsibility, into the executive committee, which is going to come at the end. And I really believe that these meetings, since we're all here, we need to either not leave until we know what's going to be said, so that everybody can actually have the opportunity to see it. Because when we were in executive committee meeting, it was said that a lot of people cannot come back. And since we are all here and we're all going to be voting, I think that we need to have a say on how this is going to look at the end. Thank you.
Thank you.
Board comments on the opening letter?
Madam Chair, I would just like to make sure that the letter reflects that this board is mandated to follow and comply with federal law, and I don't think that the Sunset Commission's report took that into consideration. And if it did, it was not stated very clearly that they understood that. And I want to make sure that that is in our response to that, please.
Thank you.
Commission?
Madam Chair, I'd like to expand upon that and can certainly concur, but I think that should be, as far as from our agency standpoint, that is a major consideration, is that we fall under federal guidelines, and we certainly need to demonstrate where we have complied with that and where they have given us exemplary grading in their review of our compliance. And I don't think that we shy away from the things that we still need to focus on. But certainly in the opening letter, we need to say, you're not the only one that's looked at us, and the federal government has passed us, per se, and said that we've done a good job.
Thank you.
Any commissioners?
One last thing.
Yes, sir. Commissioner Arriaga?
I'd like to point out that it's a very difficult task, but more than that, I've been accused of not being transparent and maybe complicity. I'd like to go on record, Madam Chair, that no staff has called me and no one in the Executive Committee has called me in preparing me to how to answer these questions. I wish that each board member and commissioner state the same thing. And if they have been contacted, to please say so.
Commissioner Arriaga, do you mean that you'd like us to state openly that that staff has not called us prior to this meeting to try and influence our acceptance or
the Executive Committee
or rejection of their recommendations?
That's correct.
Okay, I can go on record and say that.
Thank you.
Madam Chair,
Not me.
I would just like to say, I was not called, but I did make a call to General Counsel and had a long conversation about the entire report.
Okay. Commissioner Miller?
I have not been called or talked to anybody.
Commissioner Leonard?
I was not called, although I was offered the opportunity to discuss the report. And in my opinion, I received the report in sufficient time to go over it and ask questions. I received a response, although I'm glad to see an amended response. I was not called. No one tried to influence me in any way. I have no problem with the procedure, the way it happened.
Commissioner Westcott?
I have no comment.
Commissioner Stevens?
I did not get called or talk with anyone before. Has anyone spoken with anyone before, not just called?
Thank you.
I didn't get called, but I've had several conversations with General Counsel about having questions, just like Commissioner Wilkinson.
Madam Chair, I think we need to be clear about whatever implication there is. I think if we've spoken to staff in order to gain more knowledge about the report, or that's
open. I did call the staff, and but the main thing is we're not being steered or directed on how to answer the Sunset's request.
Yeah, no, not at all.
And
I think we're
apparently everybody's just on the same page.
8 independent minds here today.
Thank you so much.
I believe the request was of both the commission and the board, and I'm happy to ask the same of my board. If we'll start on the end, and if you will just comment as to whether or not there was an attempt to influence you or if you've had communication.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and there was not on my behalf at all.
There was none on mine either.
Madam Chair, there was no attempt to influence me, although I did contact General Counsel to ask some factual procedural questions.
Materials have been provided, but there's been no attempt to influence any of my responses.
Madam Chair, I've had no discussion whatsoever with any staff or any of the other board members regarding the Sunset Commission's report. and the response generated or suggested by staff.
Madam Chair, I have not been contacted by any staff or been tried to be influenced by the board or staff in any way.
And as for myself, I have had communication with General Counsel. I have had communication with the Commissioner. Most of those were procedural in nature and organizational in their structure. In any of those communications, there was no attempt to influence my opinions as they relate. In fact, there was no conversation about my opinions as they relate to the staff's recommendations. I received the materials at the same time the rest of my board did.
Thank you.
Are there any other commissioners or board members who have comments on the opening statements?
Madam Chairman, I would like to say, when I did have a conversation with General Counsel, I was not in any way influenced or tried to be influenced.
Thank you.
I'd like to make one comment, Madam Chair, on the opening statement, if I would.
Yes, sir.
While I don't want us to appear to be defensive, I do want us to be firm in our statement, because we have been given the language towards the board, and the commission has been firm as well. So we must be equally responsive, not so much to in a defensive manner, but just to be sure and firm in how we respond.
Madam Chair.
Yes, Commissioner Turner.
Mr. Pena, I agree wholeheartedly. I did ask our general counsel to tone down some of the defensive posture, but one thing I didn't mention in my comments earlier that I'd like to mention now is that this Sunset staff report doesn't do anything to talk about the things that we do right. It did clearly get some things wrong in the reporting, and I think that we're absolutely entitled and should point those things out, and I think that Ms. Lewis and the remaining staff have done a good job of doing that in a judicious way, and I think your comments were well taken. We appreciate that also.
Are there additional comments by the board?
Madam Chair, I'd just briefly like to mention that perhaps it would be beneficial with respect to the idea of bringing the agency within the purview of Chapter 472. Speaking for the board, I know that we fall underneath a federal statute, and that's the main kind of purpose of our mandate we have as a board, and it might be beneficial to kind of speak to the differences between some of the agencies under 472, or get into a little more detail about the differences between the agencies with the purpose of kind of showing how it may not be efficient or the best use of resources to do away with what we have in Chapter 1105 and bring us within the purview of 472.
And I think we'll have some additional opportunities, so you're hopeful that there be some additional comment in the actual introductory portion of the letter? Okay, thank you. Board, while there's a pause, do you have any other comments as they relate to the introductory portion of the letter?
Commissioners, any other comments generally? We'd open and see if anyone has a motion for an action on 1.1.
Madam Chair, I move to agree with the report that for the Sunset Commission to continue Real Estate Commission and a personal board for 6 years and place them under the SDI Act. And the reason I mentioned that is because we've been chastised. There's a perception out there, whether it's real or not, it is still out there. We can always come back and get back on the Chapter 1105. Let's prove our existence. Let's prove to the public, let's prove to the legislature that we're going to embrace the recommendation, and I know we're going to do well. We have the staff, we have the commission, so that's the reason for my motion.
Motion, Madam Chair?
I have a motion and a second. Is there discussion?
Can I go ahead and open that agenda
Yes,
item on my side so that our
Sorry.
conversation can be uniform in comments? So on behalf of the Texas Appraiser Licensing and Certification Board, is there a motion as it relates to agenda item 1.1?
I'd Madam Chair, I move that the commission and board disagree with the Sunset staff recommendation to change status.
Okay, we have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
A motion by Commissioner Board Member Lynch and second by Board Member Bolton, which now we have two motions that are in direct conflict with one another, so it's a great time to engage conversation.
And your motion would only be for the board?
That's correct.
That's correct. Just making sure everybody understood that.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
If it's appropriate time for discussion, I absolutely appreciate the spirit behind Commissioner Arriaga's motion. However, I respectfully disagree that it's a good idea to try to put these two square pegs into a round hole and squeeze us into the SDSI Act when we have our own legislation currently in place that we could amend and are in fact willing, based on our staff's recommendations, to amend to address the issues that the Sunset Commission has identified. I would say, however, that should Commissioner Arriaga's motion fail, I intend to make another motion that we disagree in part and keep Chapter 1105 with the amendments, but that we agree with returning for sunset review in 6 years, which I think will address the expediency and efficiency issues that personally I've seen in our agency's efforts to deal with some of our problems, including those identified. So that would be my intent, and that's my 2 cents on Commissioner Arriaga's motion.
Yes, Commissioner Stevens.
The legislation granted us the SDSI status, and we have not followed and complied with the regulations. And that is why the Sunset Committee has made the recommendation that we go into the original 472, and that we also comply. And if we have nothing to fear, then why should we not want to be checked on in 6 years instead of 12 years? Part of the problem has been that we have not, a lot of the things that go on during these meetings is that we each go to work, we serve, we come here for TREC every 3 months, or sometimes a little more often. But even though we go to work and we work on the field, we're disengaged from what the agency is doing. And this is an invitation to really improve ourselves. And I think that on 472, following Commissioner Arriaga's recommendation, is if we could bring all the things from 1175 and adopt them into 472 to make sure that we comply. And there should be for every action there should be a reaction. That is what the legislation intended when they granted us the privilege of 1175, and we did not follow and we did not comply. And because of that, this is an opportunity to improve, and I take it. Thank you.
Ms. Chairman, may I ask for the opportunity to ask my legal counsel a quick question?
Sure.
Is it appropriate, do I understand correctly that if in fact these motions were to be undertaken and we disagreed, that this board would have no voice, and if there was an approval of going under the SDSI and not keeping Chapter 1105, we don't really have an option? If TREC goes that direction, we will be carried with it, or would we be able to continue as an SDSI agency separate and apart from TREC?
Well, as I understand the motion on TREC side, it's not to remove the SDSI status of the agency. It's simply to put the agency under Chapter 472.
Correct, which is a different set of regulations and would create a problem from at least my perspective. My question is this: is it appropriate for the board to make comment during the comment portion of TREC's, during the conversation that TREC is currently having, or is it more appropriate for us to wait until TREC makes their votes and recommendations to have any comment to that regard?
Well, and I think that's probably best directed to TREC's general counsel.
I think the purpose of having a joint meeting is so discussion on the issue can take place simultaneously. Even though the votes and motions may be different, I think it's appropriate for each agency each board and commission member to speak their mind. In the end, we could report that the board voted one way and the commission voted another way, and that's fine. But your ultimate question, in the eyes of the legislature, we will be treated as one agency.
I wanted to be clear about, that's what was my understanding, and then secondly, that I do think it's helpful to the degree that my board may have any comment, that we engage in the conversation now as opposed to at the end of the conversation. And so I wanted to be sure that you're aware that you have that opportunity.
Madam Chair.
Yes, sir.
Commissioner Stevens or Arriaga, can you tell us what provisions in Chapter 472 you think would help correct the issues that the agency faces today if they were applied to our agency? And be as specific as you like, please, that we're not already going to adopt by the recommendations of the staff. For example, we're already going to adopt, or we're asking and volunteering to adopt the reporting requirements, the additional reporting requirements in 472. So what other aspects of Chapter 472 do you find more attractive than Chapter 1105?
I will, if you permit me first.
Mr. Arriaga.
And we talked about it earlier, so I'm not a brain. We talked about earlier in our meeting. The main difference between a 472, if I'm not mistaken, and the 1105 is owning real estate. I believe owning real estate was what got us in trouble. The word was used, hoarding money without enough proper communication. And I'll show you, and we'll be able to speak to that point when we talk about, forget which article is it, Counselor, that talks about setting budget for the building. And at that point in time, I'll bring it up. But I'm afraid that that's what got us into trouble. The decision was made at some time years ago that we're going to build a building. I never could connect the dots, why and when. And you heard my name being mentioned, being on the building committee. I can count on one hand the times we met since that time. And I had to petition, beg to get on that board or on that committee. And Madam Chair was nice enough to appoint me to that. We made some mistakes, and the main one is that we don't communicate enough. And I really believe that if we go back and accept the Sunset's recommendation, which includes might have to sacrifice building a building, which I don't believe can be done anyway. We've had one meeting, and I had requested a second meeting. We would not be able to do it because it's not a priority, never has been. But some way, somehow, we put a whole bunch of money behind the idea that we're going to build the meeting. So the main difference is the owning real estate, Councilor.
And so you'd rather surrender that right entirely than control that decision as a body?
Our service to our customers and protecting the public is 10 times more important than a new building.
Thank you. Commissioner Stevens, what about you?
Yes, Commissioner Turner, I think that it is a privilege and not a right to be able to be granted the SDIC, and we did not comply. So because we did not follow the rules that the legislation entrusted us with, that is the reason why I stand behind what we're talking about. Because if we would have, then we would not even be having this discussion. But this is the way of the legislation to say, you know, I'm not sure what happened here, because when I came here, the first thing I was told is, look at that lot that is available over there. We are going to be buying that building. When I came in, I assumed incorrectly that decisions have been made, that this commission had already decided and it was good for it. I have never, in the time that I have served, been given any information telling me the reasons and the rationale why we are here. But nevertheless, the most important thing is that somebody authorized all those funds to be put away. And furthermore, we have been hearing Mr. Olmikson give us reports that he has not only been speaking to the legislation, but they have been also making deals with other agencies. So if we didn't even make that decision, and we did not as a commission agree to have this building because it was the best decision for us, then how Again, those decisions have been made, and who gave them the authority? That is precisely the problem that we have, and that the Sunset Commission is bringing forward today. And that is the reason why I stand behind revoking this until we earn it again. And it doesn't mean that we're relinquishing. It means we lost it because they gave it to us and we did not do right by it. Thank you.
Respectfully, we never voted to build a building. We voted to examine the possibility. And this body, whether it was this group of people or not, every time the budget was approved in August, if money was set aside, that was agreed, that was voted. The Budget Committee brought it to the Commission. The Commission voted to do that. So it is not a staff-driven, pull-from-the-sky idea. This goes back to 2014, when many of you were not on the Commission, and that was brought, and the staff was authorized to have discussions, but there is still no agreement by this body to build a building, just to examine the possibility of a building.
Madam Chair, one
Yes.
correction.
Okay.
And it goes as earlier as later of November 2016, when this commission gave approval to the executive committee to continue studying the possibility. At that time, we already had over $10 million set aside. And then I just checked with Tony a few minutes ago. In March of April of last session, 2017, there was a meeting with the vice chair and the legislature and some other people to discuss having a meeting, and that meeting came to a halt because the governor's office did not know anything about a building. Mentioning that, I got elected chair in February of 17, and I was the vice chair. I was not at that meeting.
You were the vice chairman of the commission.
That's correct.
Okay.
And,
No.
and on the executive committee.
The vice chairman Jones went. This is a different meeting? Okay, I'm sorry.
And I was elected vice chair in February 2017.
Okay.
So someone somehow set up meetings under the theory of the executive committee being there, and I never knew about it. And that's why the governor's office, I believe, decided to put a foot down and not agree to talk about any more buildings.
I'm going to ask Mr. Olmexon to clarify the times and dates.
So all of the commissioners and board members were provided with a very extensive written report that includes the rationale, the authority, the dates, the attendees of meetings. The meeting that Commissioner Arriaga talks about was a meeting called by TAR, not by this body, to pursue getting legislative permission language in the bill with the bill sponsors. We were asked to be there to answer questions, which we're authorized to do. Previously, I think that the commissioners' description, there was a November meeting at which I provided an extensive report. At that time as well, an oral report on the status of the building exploration at that time, and reported what had changed, that it was a requirement now that the agency receive direct, specific permission from the legislature for the Facilities Commission and this body to enter into a lease arrangement for a specific site. So because that was a new requirement after the adoption of the capital area master plan, that was included as a part of the legislative authorization at the meeting in November to continue to pursue legislative particular issues, and that delegation was provided that authority to continue to do that. And in between meetings, it typically is the executive committee that has authority to do that. There was a meeting at which Commissioner Jones met with TAR and myself and the Facilities Commission, and that was the primary, folks. That was in December, I believe, of 2016. Hang on one second. Yeah, so I apologize, but it was prior to the election, prior to the February meeting at the time. Yeah, this was before the bill was amended. So prior to the time that that Commissioner Arriaga was elected as the vice chair.
Mr. Olmixon, can we ask Tony to see if that's correct?
Yes, I was just going to say that when you asked me about the meeting, I didn't give any indication who was at that meeting in the middle of the session, and there were no commission members there. It was a meeting. The executive director is correct. That was a meeting that was called by TAR, and there weren't any policymakers at that meeting. We were there to be a resource to answer questions.
What month and what year did that meeting hold?
That was in the. I apologize. I don't remember when that was, but it was during the last session.
During the session, 2017.
Yes, sir.
Okay, and it was in March, April, and I went back and saw the minutes. I saw the November 16 meeting and I saw also the tape, Madam Chair, where Mr. Olmixon gave us a report, and we did, as a group, give the authority to the Executive Committee to proceed with the building. And then subsequently, there was a meeting in March, April, and you sent me an email, or Doug did, saying there was TAR, a legislator, the staff, the governor's office, and the vice chair. I was elected vice chair in February 2017. Never knew about that meeting.
Yeah, I don't know about that email, but the vice chair was not at that meeting.
Yes, he was.
The one with the legislature?
That's what he said.
No, sir.
Well, it's in, you send me it. Look at, well, it's hard. He said, she said, but it's in writing. And you give me 2 seconds, I can show it to you.
Okay. Well, I apologize. I was present at that meeting, and it was staff, TAR staff, the governor's office, and the sponsors of the bill.
So there was one meeting that the vice chair, Bill Jones, was at, and it was prior to the meeting that we're talking about now. That meeting was held at the Facilities Commission, and it included all the members, the key staff members of the Facilities Commission, myself, members of TAR, because they're the ones who carry legislation or discuss legislation, getting legislation carried, at which time we crafted the permission language, at least put that on the table. It was eventually pulled from the bill. It was amended into one version of the bill. It was not included. It was not included in the final version of the bill, and it was pulled at the request of the Senate sponsor when the governor's office, liaison to the Facilities Commission, who is also appointed to this advisory body that is made up of leadership, that includes the governor's office, lieutenant governor's office, the Facilities Commission, the Preservation Board, the Historical Commission, and others. That person who has the oversight, the policy liaison between the governor's office and the Facilities Commission said, I sit on that, I'm a representative on that body, and I oversee the Facilities Commission, but this is the first time I'm hearing about the project. Now, we had worked for almost 2 years at that point, almost 2.5 years, directly with the Facilities Commission on the project, but they had failed to keep their liaison, their governor's office liaison. And so the message that came back to us was simply, I don't know enough about it. There's time, it's a very short time left in the legislative session. We can deal with it in the future. Let's pull it. And that is detailed in the report that I gave to everyone.
Madam Chair?
I'm happy to answer any other questions.
And if you can be so kind, you can get someone to research that, but you did send me in that report, and Tony has also confirmed that that meeting happened during the legislative session. Is that right, Tony?
The meeting with the commission staff, the staff of the Senate sponsor, and the governor's office and TAR happened in 2017 during the legislative session. But there were no commission members there, sir.
Well, you stand corrected, because if you can go back, it's in writing, and Mr. Olmection just said that he was, that Commissioner Jones was there.
I'm sorry. We're talking about two different meetings. One that Commissioner Jones was at, that was with the Facilities Commission staff at the Facilities Commission. The specific date, I can go back and research the exact date of that.
If you can do that. I
However,
apologize to the commission, and excuse me for interrupting you. I do not want to hold up the hearing on something so insignificant, but at the very end, you're going to find out that, hopefully I'm incorrect, and if that's the case, I stand corrected and apologize. But we can very easily go back and research it. The reason to bring this up, because under item 1.1, the only difference between the two governing styles that for lack of a better word, is owning real estate. And I really believe that we've been going in the wrong direction.
Madam Chair. I had Commissioner Westcott. Did you have your hand up?
Yes, I did, and I just wanted to go on the record as stating that what Commissioner Arriaga just stated, that the sole difference between 1105 and 472 is not just owning real estate. That was provided to you in the materials. So there are a number of other material differences. And, I think I want to go back and address some of Commissioner Stevens' comments as well, that, it's important to realize that even if we went to 472, we would still be an SDSI agency. Your comments, Madam, sounded more like you wanted us to be placed directly under, the governor's office and no longer independent at all. That, frankly, they sounded like they exceeded the recommendations of the Sunset staff. I would caution everyone here, Section 1105 was crafted specifically with the needs and requirements of the board and the commission in mind. There are substantial differences between the two, between 472 and 1105. The need for greater oversight and greater reporting standards, such as those in 472, have been acknowledged by staff. And I feel that that is appropriate. I also would like to say that I agree with TJ's unmade motion that we should come back in 6 years. And Sunset should take a look at us again in 6 years. I believe that reflects the adequate response to the seriousness of the matters raised by Sunset and the performance of this board, specifically as Bob harped on the underperformance of the call center in those matters. So I just want everybody to really, really think hard about the differences that are more than just owning real estate. If what we're seriously concerned with is whether or not a building should be built, fine. Let's have that conversation. Let's continue to have that conversation. But to push ourselves, as TJ said, 2 square pegs into 1 round hole is foolhardy and hasty.
Commissioner Leonard, I believe you had something.
Commissioner Westcott just took a lot of my thunder, but I'm going to speak against Commissioner Arriaga's, with all due respect, motion. There are many, many more differences than just the building and the ability to own or lease real estate. For example, what goes into the recovery trust account. That's a big one. So if we move from one SDSI chapter 1105, fold us into 472, I don't understand what the point would be. We're going to have to get enough adjustments in the statute because we are so different. We're going to have to make enough changes that it kind of doesn't make sense. And I think if you really feel like we've made so many mistakes, you would want to keep us in our own chapter 1105, easier to shine the light on us. To me, it would create more responsibility, more accountability, instead of folding us into another chapter that was created for the State Board of Public Accountancy, professional engineers, and the Board of Architectural Examiners. It doesn't make sense to me. If you think we have failed in our mission, leave us in 1105, shine the light, give us the responsibility, give us the accountability, and
Thank you.
that's it.
Thank you. Did you have some people?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I appreciate the opportunity to comment on behalf of the board and at least, I think, as I understand it, speak to what the board's position was with their motion, and it is exactly that. I don't think we're looking for less oversight. I believe our concepts were that we would adopt staff recommendations which would shorten the oversight, but I have serious concerns if efficiency is our downfall, and it appears to me that's the primary focus of this report, then the transition to Chapter 472 looks like it would create massive problems in efficiency on behalf of this agency and organization. And with, again, respect to the comments, I understand them, and the concern appears to be a focus about a building. Let's talk about a building, because the other recommendation, I don't yet have a grasp of how it makes any common sense to move to 472.
Madam Chair, when recommendations are made, they can always go back and make improvements. Some of the inefficiencies where our lack of response or timely response, and we need to be able to be flexible and to accommodate changes, such as sometimes they're imposed by nature, such as Harvey. So we need to be able to respond fast to some of these challenges. I have a question for Mr. Olmikson and perhaps you as well. I am concerned, going back to the building, why the TAR, which is a body which is supposed to be totally independent from the Texas Real Estate Commission, why did they initiate a meeting that had to do with this building instead of this commission? And also some of the questions I'd like to know, did anyone from this commission ask TAR to make this motion, or why did the meeting occur? Because if TAR initiated, why are they having such influence? I believe that it should come from this commission as a commission of 9, and then if the Texas Appraisal Licensing and Certification Board also was wanting to be included, they would also have to vote and then authorize whoever to go on behalf of both agencies and speak to anyone else. But I believe that if TAR initiated it and we did not know, or if someone from this commission did it, and without the commission actually voting on it, and then went and asked TAR for permission, either way, it is not proper. I believe that everything should initiate in this commission. Thank you.
I'll let you correct everything I say that's wrong, Mr. Olmikson. I believe that the actions of the commission before, well, maybe before your time, maybe during your time, as we moved forward, and I remember when we voted on geotechnical and survey, and were you part of the commission when we appropriated the money to have those done if necessary, or was that before your time?
That was probably before my time.
Okay. Well, those kinds of votes showed the world that we were interested in examining having a building at some point in time, maybe. And as General Counsel reminded us in executive session, we have no authority to lobby or create legislation or take anything to the legislature. And in order for us to go even to the step of making a decision that maybe when we want to build a building, we have to have legislative thumbs up. So the Texas Association of Realtors is the only way that we could get legislation to get a thumbs up or a thumbs down on putting in a building. So I believe that whether staff at TAR asked for that meeting or how that came to pass, they were doing what I would say is their job, which will come when we come up with a report and there is legislation that has to happen. They will be the ones supporting or not supporting legislation that's put forth about this agency, because all we can do is answer questions. We can't lobby. So, yours, what I forget to say or say wrong.
Well,
how was their initiative? How did they start this?
This body authorized us to continue to explore the possibility of a building, to commit resources, to negotiate with the Facilities Commission, to explore the possibility. The law changed that required us to get specific written permission. That was the next required step. And so that was, I reported on that in November of 2016, and I realized that was before, I believe that was before you were appointed. I'm not positive.
I was appointed in 2015.
And, oh, okay. Yeah. So then I apologize, because if you were there, and I don't know that, I know that Mr. Arriaga was not at that particular meeting. So in any case, I reported on that at that time, that was a requirement. And so while it obligates us to nothing, it was the next step to receive permission to enter into a ground lease. That was the next step. It required legislative action to do that. It obligates us to nothing. The permission to enter into a ground lease does not make the determination of whether or not this body ever builds a building. It simply is a required step in the process.
Any other comments or things on the motion?
Madam Chair, I'd just like to go on record. Appreciate Commissioner Westcott's comments. They were head-on, and Commissioner Leonard's comments added to it greatly. They have hit the nail on the head with the statements that were made. The idea of a building was an idea. Yes, there's been some money dedicated to it. And every budget that the Commissioner and the Budget Committee has brought to us, we've approved with full knowledge that funds were being set aside. So we were in agreement. It was never, ever an issue that we were going to do this. It was an idea. It had some small legs at the time, but for the Sunset Commission report to point out that that was our main focus, that's all we ever cared about, was building a building, and we put all these other issues to the side, is incorrect. And now that we have been pointed out numerous other issues that we have to address, which we have already started addressing and moving forward in them, for them to say that we need to be taken out from under Chapter 1105, in my opinion, is got no merit whatsoever. Thank you.
Okay, the motion. Hello? Okay, thank you. The motion before the commission is for the, to agree with the Sunset Commission staff report to move the commission to Chapter 472 and away from 1105. Everybody ready to vote? Are we doing this on a roll call? Is that what you want? You want a roll call vote? General Counsel, what? Okay, Commissioner Westcott?
No.
Commissioner Wilkinson?
No.
Commissioner Miller?
No.
Commissioner Leonard?
No.
Commissioner Stevens? Commissioner Arriaga?
Yes.
Commissioner Turner?
No.
Do I vote? No. The motion fails. Commissioner Turner, did you have another motion? Oh, do you need to vote on your motion?
Yes, ma'am, I think we do.
Have you debated yours?
Well, I want to be sure. We do have the floor open for comment, and the board has made some comment as it related to general conversation, but I would like to ask if you have any specific comment as it relates to our motion.
Madam Chair, could somebody please read our motion back?
Thank you.
So I can be real clear what our motion is?
Thank you for that request, because I was concerned that the language we may want to amend. I hope General Counsel is prepared to do that for us.
Yes, Madam Chair. The motion as presented and seconded was to disagree with the Sunset staff recommendation to change our status. And my interpretation of that motion was to disagree with the recommendation to move the board under Chapter 472.
And I would just simply open the floor for conversation that I do believe some of the conversations we've heard about the additional items that were recommended by staff to call for additional review are important considerations, and the current motion doesn't appear to address those. So if that was the intent, we can certainly carry forward the motion as it were. If that was not the intent, we need to be aware of that.
I just want to summarize one of the things that I was most concerned about was lumping us into the category with the other disciplines, the architects and the engineers and the accountants, and having us to take time constantly to review their proposals when we are trying to face a more efficiency, more lean process in everything we're taking care of on our behalf instead of broadening the scope. And for that reason, I support not changing the status and not being in a group of others, but specifically in a group that was designed for us.
Was your intent, and again, I'm just trying to be clear, if the intent is solely focused on that and does not include the staff's recommendations, I think that's what this board wants to understand. And so we can be a bit more specific, and that is as it relates to.
There were other items also discussed was the ability to accept gifts that would be used for funding grants for such causes as the AMC needs.
Yes, and I believe there were some recommendations for change in statute. So maybe it's the easiest thing to do is call for the vote as it currently stands, or open the floor for, again, additional comments about concerns of the vote, if there are any concerns besides mine of the motion as it currently stands.
Madam Chair, I have a question as to, it seems to me there are two components, whether we would agree with staff and stay within the confines of Chapter 1105 or not, and then also the duration or intervals of our review. And it seems to me that at least there's the possibility of a meeting of the minds, at least majority, for a 6-year review. And so I'm wondering if that is something that we need to include, whether it be a 12-year or 6-year, or we have two motions, or how.
And this is the part that is uncomfortable, and so let's just make the chili right here in public, right? It seems to me for the first motion that what we're looking for is an agreement or disagreement with the particular item number, that's 1.1, and we have a statement or a motion in effect. As I understand the conversation, in part, our hope or response on the board side is to approve the staff's proposed response with, and potentially with changes, right? I certainly hear the commission speaking to a concern about a building that may or may not end up in their motion and does not have to be considered in ours. But as the motion is currently made, I believe it only addresses part of the question or problem as it relates to item 1.1. And so again, if the easiest way to do this, since we're uncomfortable and unfamiliar, is if you all will express what you're trying to accomplish, we will get help to get that language in. So I'll go back to the initial question. The initial motion was made by Ms. Lynch and I believe seconded by you, Mr. Bolton. If your intention was to be broader than simply to say we disagree and want to stay wholeheartedly as we currently exist under Chapter 1105 with no changes, then the motion is accurate. If your intention was something other than that, I believe we may need an amendment. Okay. Your microphone's not on, Mr. Bolton.
I'm sorry. Yes, that was my original intent as Ms. Lynch put forth. However, I also am concerned about we may need consensus between the two bodies, and if there's room for compromise, I'm just keeping my ears open for those opportunities.
And those may come in the form of an amendment.
Okay. So, hearing Mr. Bolton's intent, if that was also your intent, Ms. Lynch, I'm super fine with, I think the appropriate step is for us to call for a vote. So if, as it is currently stated, that's the position one wants to take, they would vote yes. If you believe that motion may need amendment, you would vote no, and that will provide us, depending on the outcome of the vote, that may provide us an opportunity for amendment. We'll call for a roll call, and we'll start at the end.
Could I ask one question?
Yes, sir.
Please clarify. Is the current motion to simply disagree with no amendments whatsoever to Chapter 11? Is that the current motion?
I'd like to
That is,
amend.
wait just a second.
That is
the current motion.
motion on the floor. Understand there are essentially three parts to item 1.1. There is the movement from 1105 to 472. There is staff's recommendation to keep 1105 but amend it with the addition of certain reporting requirements as detailed in staff's recommendation. And then the last part is the time for return review of sunset, 6 years versus 12 years.
So the current motion only addresses one of the three, and again, I think that's fine, and that was the intent, and I appreciate your braveness, right? It's difficult to be the first one to jump out and make a motion, but I want to be sure we try and be clear. So did that answer your question, Mr. Renfro?
Yes. It
Okay,
was
now-
not an indictment on the motion or the individual who made the motion. I just wanted to believe or understand what's before our vote at this time.
I think that's what we're all trying to accomplish. Now, Ms. Lynch, you had asked for comment?
Since it is a three-part process, do we vote for the first and then take each part separately? My amendment was to maintain our status.
So your motion was to
My
maintain
motion.
our status? Okay.
Right.
I think it would be easier because there are so many items if we attempt to get the motions to address the item in total, but certainly we'll take recommendation or comment. And again, it may be easiest for us as we're moving forward to take a vote as it currently stands and then potentially entertain a different motion if that's the desire or intent. Then the reason I say that is I have had two board members state publicly that their intent was to make the motion that they made, and I want that to be on the record and allowed. So with that, unless there is a desire or for additional communication or conversation, I think we should allow them the opportunity to vote on their intent as they had provided it. Would you rather do it some other way?
Madam Chair, I'd like to propose an amendment to the motion.
Okay.
My amendment, and I'll take a hack at this, would be to disagree with the staff report's recommendations and agree with staff's recommendations to amend the staff report, or I'm sorry, the recommendations of our staff with a slight variation with respect to the sunset review process. Rather than a 12-year process, it would be a 6-year process. If somebody would care to make that sound pretty, I would appreciate that.
May I try to make a motion, with your permission, Madam Chair, for the Real Estate Commission that perhaps could then be adopted by you all as well?
I'm certainly happy for the help. So we will suspend our discussion and re-engage it following the Real Estate Commission, who seems to be prepared to make a motion.
Madam Chair, I move that the commission disagree in part with the Sunset Staff Report recommendation and approve our staff's proposed response information with the following change: that we agree with the Sunset Commission staff's recommendation that we return for review in 6 years, whereas our staff wanted to disagree with that portion and have us come back in 12. So our staff's recommendation is to disagree in part, recommend 12-year review, and keep Chapter 1105 with amendments. My motion would be that we disagree in part and keep Chapter 1105 with amendments but agree with the sunset's recommendation that we return for sunset review in 6 years. Is that clear as mud?
A motion and a second. So, Chairman Whitworth, back to you.
So, Board, we have an opportunity, and on the floor currently is an amendment to the motion. The floor is back open for discussion.
Madam Chair, to clarify, the motion as amended by myself is exactly as stated by Commissioner Turner.
Well, that's helpful.
Just in case there's any concern there.
And I will second his amendment to the motion. That exact motion.
Ms. Lynch, would you consider an amendment to your motion?
Yes, I would, but I'd like it summarized again.
Counsel, are you available to summarize the motion?
Yes, Madam Chair. Basically, the amended motion would be to disagree in part with the Sunset staff report recommendation, agree with the agency staff recommendation to keep Chapter 1105 with additional amendments as recommended by agency staff, but to agree with a 6-year sunset review.
Correct.
Mr. Bolton, are you willing to amend your second to the amended motion? So we now have an amended motion and second. Is there any further discussion?
I would just like to just add that I think it's important that we are not admitting that we have lost our mission or failed in our mission. I think the report begins with that language, which then creates, I think, a contrast to the rest of the report that just says we have things to fix. So I believe that this motion addresses our intent to go a different direction in the places where maybe we did not. If we made a bad decision about certain things, it's okay. You don't chop your hand off when you make that decision. You can go the other direction. And I'm glad that this motion allows for that, but it also does not, we don't admit to losing our mission. I believe our mission as an end user of our product, as a banker, I receive quality product and a quality time. So from beginning to end, it's still working. Now what's happening in between probably does need, and we're admitting to this, adjustment and attention. So I'm glad that this motion reflects that, and not so much this body saying we've completely failed in what we're trying to do, because I don't, having been here not a long time, I believe we are accomplishing the end goal of the process of an appraisal. So if that makes any sense, I want to be sure that we don't admit that we have failed in our mission. So I'm thankful for the motion the way it's stated.
And in respect to the comments that have been made about a building that were a part of this motion to start with, I believe we'll have a further opportunity to take some of those comments up with other issues. And so I'm not discounting those comments as I'm deciding on my vote or position as we move forward. Roll call vote. We'll start at the end, please. Are you in support of this motion that is currently amended and on the floor?
Yes.
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 And yes. Oh, yes, I apologize. The motion passed unanimously, so there's no, we will move to the next agenda item from my perspective.
We're going to see if there's any discussion on our motion, which was made by TJ and seconded by Chart, being the same motion that the board just voted on. Any discussion? Commissioner Miller?
I just have to say that I've only been on the commission a year, and I have seen a lot of time spent on preparing for the Sunset Commission. It's going to take a lot of time to do this again in 6 years. And if there's an old fight, we should take the responsibility to solve that fight some other way.
Okay.
Madam Chair?
Yes, sir.
I will have to, with all due respect, vote no on this motion. I'll tell you why. Board Member Peña, we have some big problems, not as big as yours. I saw some, but we have some major problems that it took for us a lot of effort in order to move forward, and this is airing dirty laundry, that's not really fair, but in order to move forward, we had to, some of us had to put our foot down in doing staff evaluations in order to pay attention to performance measures as well as concerns that were out there. And those concerns are still there. And don't know whether this sounds official or not. For the record, I'm going to give you a card, Madam Chair, from a gentleman. He asked me to give you his names. Robert Watson out of Houston. Met with him yesterday, serendipitously in Chicago at a conference we were at. Still having problems, waiting over 30 minutes for a call to answer, and then got disconnected. And I know it's going to take up to 24 hours to call him back. And 18 hours later, he had not gotten a call back. Our problems persist. I need to make sure that we, in the future, work harder. So with all due respect, when the vote comes, Madam Chair, I'm going to vote no.
Any other comments on this motion? We'll roll call it. Commissioner Westcott?
Yes.
Commissioner Wilkinson?
Yes.
Commissioner Miller?
Yes.
Commissioner Leonard?
Yes.
Commissioner Stevens?
Yes.
Commissioner Arriaga?
No.
Commissioner Turner?
Yes.
Yes, for me. Okay, Jamie. At least we'll open 1.2. Let me, before we open that, just real quickly tell you that Christine Anderson has gone and bought some sandwiches or something, and at some moment in time, we can stop for a few minutes and have food. And then we probably everybody needs to pony up a little money so Christine didn't have to buy your lunch, but I don't know what that was. Okay, she'll let us know when it arrives. Go ahead.
We got money in the building fund, Madam Chair. We can borrow some.
It's not on the agenda.
I don't believe our board has authorized the use of those dollars for sandwiches, so I will be happy to help any board member that may need help to buy their sandwich.
Thank you, Christina.
We are on agenda item number 1.2, which is to direct the agency to evaluate and update its key performance measures.
And that is also where we are. I would look for an emotion of some sort. Commissioner
Madam
Stevens,
Chair?
are you prepared?
Yes, ma'am. I move that we follow the Sunset Committee's recommendation to direct the agency to evaluate and update its key performance measures.
Second.
Board.
Madam Chair.
Mr. Bolton?
I think you either need to get closer to your mic, maybe.
Hello.
There you go.
Make a motion that we vote to adopt the Sunset staff's recommendation.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Bolton, a second by Ms. Lynch. I appreciate you all being brave. We'll open the floor to discussion.
We open the floor for the discussion. Anyone on the commission side?
Any discussion on the board side?
Call for the vote. We'll start on this end this time. Commissioner Turner?
Yes.
Commissioner Arriaga?
Yes.
Mr. Stevens?
Yes.
Commissioner Leonard?
Yes.
Mr. Miller?
Yes.
Commissioner Wilkinson?
Yes.
Commissioner Westcott? Yes. And yes. For me.
And we will also roll call the vote, and we will also start with my vice chair and move the opposite direction this time. Ms. Lynch?
Yes.
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 And yes for myself, so the motion passes unanimously on behalf of the TALCB.
And unanimously on the part of the Real Estate Commission, and we open 1.3. .3
is to direct the agency to develop a budget policy that fosters more realistic, straightforward budgeting and fee setting.
Yes.
Madam Chair,
Yes, Commissioner Stevens?
I have been a part of the Budget Committee for the last
Yes, thank you.
2 years. Thank you for your trust. And I'd like to make a motion that's, I agree in part that it directs staff to prepare revised policies, but with the involvement of the budget committee or any other body member that you wish to appoint, because serving in there, I have noticed that a lot of the, that we need, in part of the sunset report referred that we need to keep in mind that part of the, following the law, we need to differentiate the role-making job of the commission and the board from the executing part of the staff. And a lot, this recommendation that we see in front of us is ceding all the changes to the staff, which is precisely what Sunset is trying to avoid. So because of that, I'm going to make a motion that we agree in part directing actually the commission, somebody that is appointed by this body, to direct the revised policies for the November meeting with the assistance of council.
Okay, I have a motion. Do I have a second? A motion, do I have a second?
I'm not sure. I'm just not sure I understand the motion. I'm sorry. How does it differentiate from what our staff has recommended with regard to the Sunset staff's recommendations? Commissioner Stevens, I just want to understand.
What's in writing, it says direct staff to prepare. It does not include the commission. So staff is responsible for doing everything.
Okay, so you want to, you would.
I think that the commission, whoever is in the budget committee, needs to also have some input on this before it's presented, not just the staff.
Could we, not trying to change anything you did, but could we just direct it in your motion to be the budget committee and the staff?
Yes.
Okay.
Madam Chair, I move that we agree in part directing the budget committee and with the assistance of the staff to prepare revised policies for November meeting.
Okay, perfect.
Second.
Now I've got a second. Okay, thank you.
Board, the floor is open for a motion.
Madam Chair,
Mr. Pena.
I agree in part, excuse me, I make a motion, we direct the agency to develop a budget policy that fosters more realistic, straightforward budgeting and fee setting. And I agree in part and direct staff to prepare revised policies with the help of the budget committee for November meetings. So the actual, I apologize, the actual motion is to agree in part and to direct staff and the budget committee to prepare revised policies for November meetings.
Second.
And eventually I got there.
Very good. We have a motion and a second discussion.
Go ahead and take your vote.
Hearing none, we'll go ahead and call for a vote. All in favor, we'll start.
Yes.
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 And yes, the motion passes unanimously on behalf of TALCB.
Is there any discussion on our motion?
Madam Chair?
Yes.
Just a recommendation that in the future that the budget committee has a lot more input on not just listening, but also as of the timing of the meetings. A lot of these meetings that occur for the Texas Real Estate Commission, and I have mentioned this in the past, are presented and they're discussed, but then right before our meeting at 8 o'clock, there may be changes. And I believe that something as important as budget needs to be thought out, and we need to have time to deliberate before we make a decision, because some people travel before they get here, and that morning sometimes it's not, there's a gap of 2 hours, and I think that there are things that we can cover via conference call, and we can have plenty of time to answer questions, and I believe that it is inappropriate to have meetings that make decisions as important as budget the morning of our Texas Real Estate Commission. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments on the motion?
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
As I understand the motion, it was to have the budget committee prepare the budget with the involvement of the staff?
Both bodies.
I think it's sort of a joint.
The proposal by the staff
only leaves everything to staff. And I think that there should be some involvement with the budget committee before it's presented to the rest of the commission.
And my question would be, isn't that the way we already do it?
No,
Isn't that the purpose of the budget committee?
I think it's,
it is, but it is not done that way. We just pretty much, we are sent the report, we evaluate it, we may have questions. It is very hard to get, there are 3 people in this committee, and it's very rare that we get to make the meetings. And a lot of the times, there may be a conference call, and I may get to speak with Mr. Olmikson, who is always very willing to answer any questions. Miss Priscilla Fiveho, I'm sorry for misspelling your last name, but she is wonderful in answering any questions. But I think that on something as important as this, we need to be able to have at least a quorum, being able to talk and discuss things.
Madam Chair?
wait just a minute. Did that answer your question, Mr. Lynn?
Yes.
Okay. I've got Commissioner Westcott first.
Just a question. Commissioner Stevens, could you direct us to where in the TREC response to the Sunset staff report that it says only the budget, only the staff should be developing the budget?
I will send it to you via email, but it is that, no, I'm sorry, repeat your question again.
Could you direct our attention to where in section 1.3 of the TREC's response to the staff report, it says that only the commission staff should develop the budget?
I did not say that. I said that it should be, the recommendation by staff from TREC reads that direct staff to prepare. My only change to that recommendation is that the budget committee be involved.
I'm asking you to show us where in the Sunset staff report, where in the TREC response to the Sunset staff report it says, or directs only staff. The word used is consistently is in the Sunset report is agency. Agency includes us.
It may not necessarily be in the Sunset Committee report. I just think that it would be important that not just staff prepares.
I agree with you, and I'm fine with your motion, but I just think, guys, like if we're going to be making motions on what is actually in our response to the report, let's make sure that it's something that's actually in the response to the report. Thank you.
Well, would you like to make the motion?
I second your motion. I think your motion's fine.
Okay. I thought there was a problem.
It's fine. I just think that, there's nothing wrong with your motion per se. I just think if we're going to be making motions, kind of going forward, let's at least make sure it's relevant to something that's actually in the response, or it's actually written in the report. Because what we're doing here, just to kind of clarify and help everybody along a little bit, is we are looking at the wording that TREC and and the board are, using to respond to the Sunset staff report. So if we're going to be talking about, changing words in the Sunset staff report, let's make sure it's at least something that's actually in the response to the Sunset staff report. Let's make sure it's actually something in our response to the Sunset staff report. That's it.
I'm not sure if it's on the Sunset report. I just made a recommendation, being a member of the budget committee.
Understood.
Okay, Commissioner Arriaga.
The problem is not what's on the report. The problem is not what's in the report, it's what's not in the report. And by saying that is, we meet every 4 months. And once we get to the meetings, we have 300, 400, 500 pages agenda. And we meet, our committee meetings meet an hour before the committee meeting. And it is not fair sometimes for committee members to get all this information at the last minute. It is more important, and I think Mr. Olmikson will agree, that when you send out information on, let's say, for the budget committee, it's okay to send everybody else. Okay, now we cannot discuss it, I understand, but at least we can understand it and have the questions ready. The problem is we do not have enough time to get prepared and really put our arms around what the budget is going to be, or the building committee report, et cetera. I hope we learn from that.
Thank you. Any other comments on the motion?
I would ask
Yes.
that, I think some of the confusion is, Commissioner Stevens, could you restate the motion? I think I agree, but if you could restate your motion, I think it would be helpful.
I said that I agree in part
that directs staff to prepare revised policies for the November meeting with the assistance of the Budget Committee.
Okay. Are we ready to vote? Okay. Westcott, you start. I'm not going to call on you. Let's take a lesson from the board. Go.
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Yes. The motion for the Real Estate Commission on whatever we just did, 1.3?
1.3.
Passes. And I open the discussion on 1.4, or open it for a motion. Got it?
Madam Chair,
Commissioner Turner?
I move that the commission, with regard to item 1.4, agree in part with the Sunset staff report recommendation and approve our staff's proposed response information.
Second.
Have a motion and a second. Let you do your thing.
We will open item number 1.4 to direct the agency to update its fund balance policy to limit growth. Floor is open for a motion.
Madam Chair?
Ms. Lynch?
I agree propose that we agree in part direct staff to prepare revised policies for the November meetings.
I'll second.
A motion and a second. Any discussion? Would you like to vote first, or would you like us to go ahead?
Yes, go ahead.
If there is no discussion, the board has the opportunity to vote. We'll start with Ms. Lynch.
Yes.
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 Yes. Motion passes unanimously for TALCB.
We have a motion before the commission on 1.4. Is there any discussion? You start.
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. The Real Estate Commission's motion on 1.4 passes, and we will now open 2.1, I believe.
May I ask for a clarification, Madam Chair?
Yes, sir.
The commission's motion did not include, at least I did not hear it, a directive to bring updated policies to the November meeting.
It actually did, in essence, by saying, and approve staff proposed response.
Can I raise that question, Ms. Lewis? That was my intention in my motion. If I moved to approve staff's proposed response information, that would include the directives that are on our guide sheet. And do we need to include those directions in our motions henceforth, or?
In this particular case, in 1.4, that is actually in the response, and that they plan to bring policies forward for consideration at their meeting in November.
Okay, and can you clarify whether or not, maybe we should,
So your motion would include that because you added the part about approving staff's response.
Excuse me, that was the advice that we were given
Yeah, and
in
that
the
is
meeting,
correct.
as if we were just
Yeah.
approving the staff response. That's the
Right.
way we could say it, rather than iterating all of those things.
Right.
My apologies for adding unclarity where it was clear to everyone else.
so a motion like I made would be sufficient for 2.3, 2.4,
Yes.
3.1, et cetera?
Yes.
Without having to read the exact language that was,
Yes, because those items are included in the staff information included in the proposed response. That is correct.
thank you.
And we are to agenda item number, I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, just for clarity, the same would be true for the board.
Thank you. We are to agenda item number 2.1, which is to eliminate instructor approval authority. In short, the floor is open for a motion.
Madam Chair?
Mr. Bolton?
Excuse me. We move that the board agrees with the Sunset staff report recommendation. I think I have the whole motion.
Does your motion include agreement with the staff response?
Staff proposed response information. That's what you want.
It does. Thank you.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. I'll attempt to restate it since it did come in two parts, that we agree with the additions of specific language allowing TREC and TALCB to set some minimum instructor standards for providers to follow. That is the intent of the motion?
Madam Chair, that is precisely the intent of the motion.
Thank you. So we do have a motion and a second, and the floor is open for discussion.
Go ahead, do your whole thing.
We'll go ahead and vote. I believe we started this, so Alex, if you'll start this time.
Yes.
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 And yes. Madam Chair, if we got out of order, I was just attempting to save some time while you were missing a commissioner, but
Okay. As I told Vice Chairman Arriaga, I'm just trying to keep from being too confused here. So we're opening 2.1, which we did a little earlier, and look for a motion from this body.
Madam Chair,
Yes, sir. Mr. Arriaga.
I move. Gosh, I'm lost.
2.1.
2.1, agree with additions to specific language allowing TREC and TLCB to set minimum instructor standards for providers to follow.
A second.
Okay, I think we got that. Is there any discussion? Commissioner Leonard?
I have, the only reservation, I agree, but I have a reservation that where is the oversight for the minimum standards that we are going to attempt to impose? And my first example is we license sales agents. We also license brokers. We don't license brokers to go out and hire anybody as a sales agent to hang their license there without our oversight. So who is going to, how do we know that those instructors are proficient, capable in their job?
General Counsel, I think you've had this question earlier.
Right. So if we get what is being asked for here, that we allow the providers to approve the instructors, however, the agencies will set the minimum standards of qualifications for teaching certain courses. For instance, you have to be a broker for 5 years to teach principles, something like that. Then we have rules currently that providers have to follow. They already have to provide a qualified instructor in the area, for instance, for CE, where we don't have as many strict rules. The rules that we currently have already set out the requirements for the qualifying courses. We would just keep those. It would just be up to the providers to implement them. And just as everything else currently with TREC, it would be complaint driven. So if we get complaints from consumers or other providers or students that the instructors don't know what they're talking about, then we would open a complaint and investigate it, and then there would be sanctions against the provider for not following the requirements under the rules. So it is manageable.
Commissioner Stevens, yes?
My comment is that it's a caution for the commission to not over-regulate some of the requirements that we have been asking, because part of the success of Texas has been that we do the right thing and we let the people, ones that we believe that there's a license, we let them do what they do best. And if we learn from what happened in California, California was in our shoes in about 1955 or so, and they overregulated, and right now a lot of people are moving into Texas because when the industry overregulates, it doesn't matter which industry, it kills jobs, and the cost becomes too high to do business, And that's why we're now enjoying it, and that's why we also have to be very cautious to not overregulate, and that is part of what I see, and it is my opinion, in the spirit of the recommendation from Sunset. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments? Are we ready to vote? I'll call on Turner first.
Yes.
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 Yes. Yes.
Yes. So our motion carries on 2.1 for the Real Estate Commission, and we'll open 2.2 for the elimination of a branch office license requirement.
And I would just simply make public comment that 2.2 does not involve TALCB, so we will not be addressing 2.2.
Oh, cool. We get to do this one. So do I have a motion?
Madam Chair, I move that the commission agree with the Sunset Staff Report recommendation.
Second. Is there any discussion? Okay. Westcott?
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. So we have agreed with the Sunset staff to eliminate the requirement for a branch office license, and now we will open 2.3. Okay. To remove the subjective qualifications of moral character required for licensed applicants. Seeking a motion?
Madam Chair,
Yes.
I move that we agree that we follow the recommendation of the Sunset Commission to eliminate subjective qualification required for licensure applicants, and it differs in part from staff recommendation because the staff recommendation leaves qualifications. I just want to make sure that whatever qualifications are left are objective and not subjective, which is what the Sunset Commission requested. Thank you.
Okay. Commissioner Turner?
I believe that, so your motion was to
Just
agree,
with Sunset.
agree in part
Yes.
with the Sunset, but to allow the agency to consider objective qualifications, such as other licensed disciplinary history.
Yes.
Okay. I'll second.
Okay. Do you have this one also?
Yes, ma'am, I do. So we are to 2.3, to remove a subjective qualifications required for licensure applicants. The floor is open for a motion.
Madam Chair, I move that the board agree with the Sunset Commission in part with the addition of specific language preserving agency's authority to consider objective qualifications such as other licensed disciplinary history.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. The floor is open for discussion.
I'm going to support this this motion, but I do want to go on record, in particular as the chair of the enforcement committee for TREC, to take some issue with the Sunset staff's characterization of some of the qualification language that we use right now as being subjective. It's really a misplaced term in this case. The qualifications that we use to determine whether someone's fit for licensure, if they sound subjective, such as whether someone has moral character sufficient to carry the responsibilities that a licensee would carry, those are, it's established whether or not they have proper moral character with objective criteria that underlie that subjective term. And I think that one thing, this is one of those spots that they, and selfishly I point out, admittedly, and for Mr. Morris, that the Sunset Commission wholly failed to acknowledge that we do a really good job at, which is protecting the public from either licensing persons who shouldn't hold the license that we issue, or taking licenses away from those people that hold those. So I apologize, we're already running pretty long. Thank you for allowing me to make those comments, but just want to make sure that we're all clear that we've been applying objective standards this whole time.
Chair?
Yes.
When I read the Sunset report, there's a mention of fairness, and I think there is a case that was, it was a dental board, and their concern was that some of these commissions in other states have people that work in the industry, and they have, sometimes they may use their positions to limit other people that are newcomers into the industry, and that may be unfair. And I think that when we are thinking and deciding new regulation, we need to keep that in mind, and that is one of the things that I read into the report. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
And to be clear, I agree completely with your statements. I wasn't making my statement so as to comment on yours at all. Just wanted to clarify how we've been applying the standards that we've been using up to this point.
Thank you.
And that's the North Carolina Dental Board case. So, Commissioner Westcott.
Yes, I'd just like to go on saying that I cannot support this motion. One does not have to commit a crime necessarily to be a bad actor, especially in an industry that involves, a great deal of trust and trust in, of the public. And so I think it's difficult to simply say if somebody has a criminal history, that's the sole reason for which we can reject somebody. I agree completely that we never want the enforcement or the application process to be a barrier to entry on its own merits unless someone does have specific criminal history. But I think that other disciplinary things are relevant. If someone has been disciplined, multiple times by another state agency or state board, if they have had multiple lawsuits and judgments against them in which they've committed civil wrongs or torts, I think all of that is very relevant to someone's moral character and whether they are fit to practice real estate. I do agree, Commissioner Stevens, with what you're saying, that it has gone far too far with these, many licensing boards, such as I think the famous case was with hair braiding. People required to get a license to braid hair. However, this is a very serious profession in which we're protecting consumers' homes, literally in many cases. So I cannot support this motion. Thank you,
Madam Chair. I agree with Commissioner Westcott.
Okay. You're going to let us vote, or you want to talk?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, we're going to vote, starting with Turner.
I vote no.
No.
Oh, wait a minute. I'm sorry, I got confused. Yes.
Yes, okay.
No.
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 Cool. I'm voting no, too. Yeah, and y'all be thinking on that. You go ahead and do your thing. What happens if we do different things?
Okay, so agenda item number 2.3 is open for discussion. Motion is
Now,
on the floor.
Madam Chair, there was a motion on the table that I proposed.
That's correct.
And having listened to the comments of Commissioner Westcott, I would like to rescind that motion. And if someone wants to suggest a different motion, I'd like to hear the discussion a little further.
We have a request to rescind the motion, so we currently do not have a motion on the floor. We will need one to engage conversation, so if we could have someone make an attempt at a motion. We will continue discussion.
I believe we
So
just
that
moved to disagree with Sunset Committee's, with the Sunset staff's recommendation.
I'd like to put forth an identical recommendation or motion for our side of the dais here, that we disagree with the Sunset Commission staff.
Okay, so the majority vote was no, so it's not an identical motion. If you will attempt to form a motion, that would be helpful.
All right. So the motion is that the board disagrees with the Sunset staff report recommendation. And
That's all you need.
That's sufficient if that's what your intent is.
And we'll need a motion on our side, or was my comment taken as a motion?
Hang on just a second. I have a motion. Can I get a second?
I second that motion.
Okay, now, our floor is open for discussion. I'll be happy to pause that discussion if the TREC Commission would like to take up some discussion.
We just like to get a motion on the floor. Commissioner Westcott?
Yes, Madam Chair. I'd like to move that we approve staff's proposed, or we agree with staff's proposed response to the Sunset staff, commission staff's proposed response to the Sunset.
That's different than what you just advocated for.
Is
Our staff recommended that we agree, but we placed some restrictions on that agreement, so we agree and disagree in part. I think if you want to leave the provisions as we currently have them in place, that you would move to
That's what I
disagree
want to do.
with Sunset.
Okay, then disagree. Yeah, move to disagree. Apologies.
And staff, so disagree with Sunset and our staff.
Move that we disagree with Sunset and staff.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Do you all want to go ahead and do your thing?
I can modify the motion that we're disagreeable with everybody.
I think it was sufficient in its initial form. Council, do you have some concern? I see her reaching for a mic. Okay. So the current motion, is everyone clear? That we disagree. The current motion is we disagree with the Sunset report and our staff's recommendations, and that would imply to leave things as they currently are.
That's correct, Madam Chair.
Okay. Can't remember which end we started on. Ms. Lynch, I'll let you start this time.
Yes.
Yes, I disagree.
Yes.
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 And yes. That motion passes unanimously on behalf of the TALCB board.
Did we have a chance to discuss this last motion where we disagree with everyone? Does anybody want to say anything? Okay, Commissioner Westcott, you start the roll. What? Yes, ma'am.
If you disagree, and that is your wish, we can rewrite the staff response to explain why this commission disagrees, which is basically what we had under our exception part. We'll just say we don't even want we want to leave it how it is, and we'll use the same explanations that we heard today.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think that language is really already there. You just have to change your
Just change it, but yeah. So we'll adjust.
Because the explanation about what did we rely on started.
I like this. This is good.
Commissioner Westcott, was that was the intent of?
Yes, that's absolutely the intent.
Okay, so you're voting?
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
I'd like my dissent to be included on the record, please.
Okay.
That I am concerned for fairness with this motion, and that's why I say no. Thank you.
Okay.
Yes.
Vote yes.
Yes. So the motion carries on 2.3 to disagree with the Sunset staff recommendation. So we'd open the floor on 2.4. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
This is about residency. Yes, sir.
Madam Chairman, I have a motion.
Yes, sir. Mr. Scott.
I would like to move that we agree with the Sunset staff's recommendation.
That's it?
Second.
Okay. A motion and a second. We'll stop and let you guys do what you're going to do.
Okay, agenda item number 2.4 is to remove the statutory provisions regarding certain applicants to establish Texas residency before obtaining a Texas real estate license or appraiser approval.
Madam Chair, I'd move that we agree with the Sunset report's recommendation.
I have a motion. Is there a second? A motion and a second. Discussion. I would just express a concern about geographic competence and federal regulations and the uniform standards of professional appraisal practice, and whether or not those would run in conflict with this recommendation.
Madam Chair.
Mr. Bolton.
But in compliance with USPAP, they're going to have geographic competence regardless.
Agreed.
So whether we work that into our statute or rules is not required.
Fair
in
enough.
my opinion.
Thank you for the comment.
Madam Chair, can we have General Counsel explain a little more about what the use PAP requirement, why it might be on geographic location? Have some more information on that?
Yes, Madam Chair and board members, USPAP already requires appraisers to have geographic competency when they are performing appraisal practice. So regardless of whether we have additional language in our statute or rules that says you have to have geographic competency, our statute already requires license holders to comply with USPAP, so it is subsumed within that statutory requirement.
So there would be a conflict in our statute, should we modify it, with the use PAP?
Apparently not. Apparently my comment was ill-placed, and so I think that's what you're hearing, is that my concern was not necessary and not appropriate. So let me be sure I'm clear that I agree with the comments that have followed mine, and that we wouldn't necessarily create a conflict with your motion. So there is a motion and a second. There any additional discussion? Hearing none, would you like us to take a vote, or would you like to the benefit of listening to the
I have a question on our side either way, but with your permission, Madam Chair, and it's probably directed to Ms. Lewis. What sort of language would we add to preserve license holder geographic competence on the real estate commission side? How would that operate?
Perhaps we could have some discussion first before we went there.
So can you just hang on till we
yes
have a little? So Commissioner Westcott, I think you had reason for making a motion.
You want me to answer the question?
Yes, I'm sorry.
Okay. So if they take the residency requirement, they'll be taking it out of the statute. So we would want something in the statute which would give this commission the authority to require geographic competence in the real estate, for brokers and agents. We don't have something specifically in there that's sort of implicit with the residency requirement.
Yes, I understand that. What would what would you envision that looking like? I mean, I get it, the concept, but how would we regulate that?
How would we regulate
that? Or put that in place?
Even today, we have a rule that was proposed last time that the Broker Responsibility Working Group brought forward that added the term geographic competence as to something that brokers have to be sure their agents have in their scope of duties. That they can't just say you can go work in El Paso when you live in Austin and you only know Austin, unless you have some other geographic competence. Would we have to come up with a definition for geographic competence? Maybe we would, but that could all be done by rule.
But that's kind of what I'm asking you, and I realize we don't have anything in place right now, obviously, but how do you define or measure geographic competence? Is it you spend a certain amount of time in the state, that you own property here, that you've registered with the Secretary of State?
Yeah, I think it's more in knowing your market area. In fact, the words are geographic competence in the market area you serve. It's the words that are currently proposed in our rule. So yeah, it's not extremely well defined. It's something that would sort of a reasonable man standard that enforcement would have to use if they got a complaint. Obviously, if you're trying to do something in Corpus Christi and you don't know anything about the wind laws and insurance and all of that stuff, you're probably not competent to do it. So again, it would probably be a fact-based situation.
Commissioner Arriaga?
Goes a step further. We right now have a committee looking at giving license or portability for other real estate agents in other states to come to this area. Dangerous move just because of that. It's easy for us to generate and co-broke with stuff, but when it's very difficult for someone from outside the area to come in and be an expert to be able to represent a client down here. So point well taken. I've always liked this geographic representation, I guess, is the key. So I like that.
Mr. Westcott?
Okay. So I made this motion for a very specific reason, and that is because I feel this is a huge barrier to entry and a restraint on trade, essentially, in the real estate industry in Texas. It is very, very harmful to commercial people, folks that are transacting in commercial real estate. Oftentimes, they're very large, brokerages that are operate in many different states. There's a difference between a residency requirement and geographic competency. I would submit that I can become very, very well informed through educating myself about the Los Angeles real estate market without living in Los Angeles. I also think that if you're going to jump through all the hoops and all of the requirements and education and so forth and so on in classroom time, all the requirements we put on people to become a salesperson or a broker, then you're probably going to know Texas. And if we want to put that even further, then perhaps we can make that a requirement in the education portion for out-of-state people applying to Texas to have a specific piece of understanding the Texas market and what's special and unique about the Texas market. But I think that having leaving this residency requirement in is a totally unnecessary restraint on trade.
Madam Chair?
Yes, sir.
Counselor? Can someone from outside the state come and practice in your hometown without a license?
Not without a license.
With Pro Hac V's, but I mean, it varies. But yes, is the answer, depending, Adrian.
I think he was asking about practicing law.
Practicing law.
Yeah, well, you can Pro Hac in, right? I mean, so.
Yeah, you can. Well, as to a specific case, you can be admitted to whatever court you're in, what's called Pro Hac Vice, which is on the motion of another attorney, but only for that matter. But I can go get I can go get a law license anywhere.
Anywhere.
Yeah, I can go get a law license in Colorado. I can get one in any state.
You don't have to live.
There is a patchwork quilt of requirements. For example, Colorado, I have to take the MPRE, which is a multi-state ethics exam, and get some letters of recommendation because I've been practicing 5 years. In Texas, if you want to practice law in Texas, you have to take the Texas bar exam.
Yep.
California is that way. Some states will just let me go get a license because I've been licensed in Texas. So everybody's different, but there's no state that would prohibit me from going to practice law there as long as I got a license there.
And that's what I guess I'm trying to get the heart of. We already put a number of strenuous requirements on people to become a Texas licensed by the commission, and as a result of that, it seems to me that if they're going through all the trouble to be licensed here, and they are from out of state, one would think that they are going to take the necessary requirements to be competent, certainly to transact business in this state. And if they're not, then it's impendent on us to sort that out. But I think having the residency requirement does not necessarily imply competence. I'm sure there's plenty of people who are residents here that are not competent in their geography as well. So I just don't like linking the two together.
Commissioner Westcott, I have one question then, because your motion as it is on the floor, I believe that it was the Sunset Commission's recommendation that we just remove the residency requirement, period.
Correct.
Our staff's recommendation was that we agree with that in part, but that we add that we put some kind of geographic competence requirement on out-of-state licensees. So if you were to move to just agree with Sunset, then you just want to abolish the residency requirement, period, with no geographic competence requirement.
So that's fair.
So that would be your motion currently.
Yeah.
Our staff's recommendation was to be fine, let's get rid of the residency requirement, but let's later, through via rulemaking, create some kind of geographical competence measure.
That's fine.
May I make an amendment to your motion?
Please.
To that effect then? Okay.
Okay, well, we're going to need to vote on the amendment, I think.
Okay.
And then go
I'll just
back.
rescind my motion.
You just rescind your motion?
Okay.
And so you're...
TJ, go ahead.
Okay, so then give me a motion.
Okay, I move that the commission agree in part with the Sunset staff report recommendation and approve our staff's proposed response information.
Second.
Second.
Okay, is there any discussion on that? Okay, then let's start voting with you, TJ.
Yes.
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 Yes. So the motion on 2.4 carries with agreeing with Sunset, provided specific language be added about geographic competency and now open the floor on 2 point.
Hang on just a second.
whoa,
Let me
whoa.
vote, please.
Oh, you hadn't voted yet. Whoops.
Council, could you please repeat the motion as it is currently on the floor for the TALCB?
Yes, Madam Chair and board members, the current motion is to agree with the Sunset staff recommendation, which would remove the residency requirement in our statute in its entirety.
Because USPAP covers you.
And would not include language to
For geographic competency.
preserve geographic competence. However, let me be clear that on the board side, like I mentioned before, that requirement of geographic competency is already subsumed in our statute because our license holders are required to comply with USPAP. Moreover, we already admit out-of-state licensees without a residency requirement at all under the temporary practice permit and the license by reciprocity. So residency for the board is a much different issue than it is for the commission.
Thank you. Thanks for the clarity. The motion is on the floor. And we have a question for...
I understand the comments you made, and I was going to bring that up, that we have reciprocity with other states, and we don't do anything to determine whether they're geographic competent or not. They just, if they have a license in another state, they can come over and do an appraisal. But what I want to know is the specific language that we're talking about including, how would that change anything? They're either geographically competent or they're not. And only USPAP and the process through which we go there would ultimately determine through a complaint that they weren't, right? So putting this language in isn't really going to stop them from doing what they're already doing, is it?
No, it wouldn't stop them from doing what they're already doing, but essentially what my comments were getting at is it's unnecessary to include the specific language about geographic competency on the board statute because that's already subsumed within the regulations.
I understand that, but it wouldn't hurt to reiterate it, would it? I mean, we're simply saying that if you come and practice appraisal and on their side, I guess, selling real estate, we just want you to be competent geographically. I'm not sure how that hurts anything or prevents anybody from doing anything.
But Buster, what is it in your eyes? What does that look like?
I'm just saying, who is determining that? There's only one way to determine, and it's in our standards, right? And we already allow it. I'm just saying, how does leaving the language in stop anybody from doing what's already been done? It's just kind of a reinforcement, and that's all it is in the way I look at it.
Well, I guess what I'm just trying to understand is that if you have a temporary license or reciprocal license that you're applying for, and there's a box that says, are you competent in the area that you plan to practice your real estate activity, whether it be on the brokerage side or on the appraisal side, what does that look like? How do you verify that? I mean, it seems to me that is just a rabbit hole that would probably be a block that is checked, and it would be very inefficient to try to investigate it. So.
That we're simply putting language that just says, we want you to be geographically competent. We're not adding any way we're going to go about measuring that. I mean, you're correct. Our standards already have that in there and implied, and say that if you are not, you need to decline that assignment. I understand that. I'm just trying to figure out how putting some extra language really is a barrier to anybody.
Well, it would certainly make it redundant.
Well, yes, certainly, but it doesn't stop
unnecessary.
anybody from doing what they're already doing. So, that's the point.
So in addition to being geographically competent, you should also be competent in contract law or financing. There's lots of things we need as real estate professionals to be competent about. And I'm kind of curious why we're focusing on this one area that even though we on the appraisal side do have a provision through the competency rule to take care of that, that's what scares me, is that we see these things bleed over from time to time. And so I'm just trying to get an understanding of what that might look like.
So,
Madam Chair.
Taken action. Let's keep our comments as they relate to the TALCB side.
As I read the staff report's recommendation, it says, remove statutory provisions requiring certain applicants to establish Texas residency before obtaining a Texas appraiser approval. Now, I think those are two different concepts, Texas residency and competency. The fact that someone's resident doesn't mean that they're competent. And so I think that that's what the staff was getting at. That was what the intent of my motion. That's not, if there is something in the statute that requires Texas residency, then that should be eliminated. I don't know if that speaks necessarily to the competency question.
No, the residency requirement is separate and apart from competency, because competency is subsumed within USPAP. It's a requirement for USPAP. So anytime we get a complaint, the complaint could be that the appraiser was not geographically competent. For example, you heard the discussion about if there's a property in Corpus Christi and you're not familiar with everything that goes on down there, the winds, the hurricanes, and everything else, maybe you should decline that assignment.
Well, I think, and maybe the clarity is simply that what we're trying to achieve ultimately is a response, correct? And so if we can understand what that response would look like with TALCB having a slightly different motion, I think it's simply something as succinct as competency is already handled through other regulatory means, if that's what you're trying to achieve. But so right now the motion is that simply we agree with the Sunset Commission, essentially, correct? With no competency conversation. Certainly Mr. Renfro made a point. Wouldn't it be nice if they lined up, right? So that there would be at least some statement of competency, and that's what we've been discussing. So floor's open for any additional comments. I think that. Did we not already do that? Yes. I hope so. We shouldn't have been having all that discussion without it. Council, can you confirm we did second the motion?
Yes, the motion was Mr. Sostre, seconded by Ms. Iannuzzi.
Okay, very good. Are you ready to vote? Is there any additional discussion?
I just want to be clear. Are we, on the appraisal side, are we talking about any type of license holder geographic competence within? Okay, that's what I thought. I just wanted to be clear. Thank you.
Any other discussion? We'll start the vote with Ms. Lynch.
Yes.
No.
Yes.
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 Yes. Motion passes with Mr. Renfro being the no vote for the TALCB. And I appreciate your comments, Mr. Renfro.
And in the response, it's very easy to reflect both motions and both responses. The paragraph about geographic competence will just be limited to the commission, and as you suggested, Chair Whitcliffe, we could say something like geographic competence is handled by other federal regulation for the board. So it's very easy to fold both into the same response.
Thank you. So we are to 2.5, to authorize the Texas Real Estate Commission and Appraiser Board to deny license renewal applications for non-compliant applicants.
And we open 2.5 for a motion as well. And I believe our staff recommends that we agree with the Sunset staff's report.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
I move that we agree with the Sunset recommendation.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Chairman Wycliffe?
Oh, we need a motion, please.
Madam Chair, I agree. I make a motion that we agree with the Sunset Commission recommendations.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. You want to vote first, or would you like us to? Okay. Discussion. Is there any on behalf of the board?
Is there any discussion from the commission? Commissioner Westcott?
I'd just like to go on record as saying how badly we need this. Thank you.
No kidding. Well, we'll vote, starting with Westcott.
Yes.
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 Yes. So recommendation 2.5 to agree with the Sunset staff report passes by the commission.
The board's floor is open for vote. Start on that end.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
And yes. Motion passes unanimously on behalf of TALCB.
When we open 2.6, which the staff recommends that it's only for the commission on this one, that we we agree with it, or the staff agrees with the Sunset Commission staff to direct the commission to review and streamline its inspector pre-licensing education requirements.
Madam Chair,
Commissioner Stevens?
I move that we follow the Sunset Commission recommendations to direct the Real Estate Commission to review and streamline its inspector pre-licensing education requirements.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? Start with Mr. Turner.
Yes.
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 Chairman Wilkinson, you?
Oh,
Yes.
Yes. So 2.6 passes in agreeing with the Sunset staff, and we will open 3.1, which is for the entire agency. And that would be requiring the Commission and Appraisal Board to maintain the complainant's confidentiality when possible. Staff recommendation is to disagree, and read the response quite clearly, that violates actually the Constitution, current statutes, fundamental fairness, and all kinds of other things. So I've just opened it and explained it. I haven't asked for a motion, but I will.
Madam Chair, I move that the commission disagree with the Sunset staff report recommendation on item 3.1.
Second.
Motion is second. I turn it over to you, Chairman Wycliffe.
Thank you. The floor is open for a motion for the board with
Madam
regard to
Chair.
complaints confidentiality. Yes, sir.
Motion to disagree with the Sunset Commission's recommendation.
I have a motion and a second. The floor is open for discussion. Is there any on behalf of the board?
Floor is open for discussion.
I have a
Commissioner
question for
Stevens.
General Counsel.
Okay.
Due process means that is there a way that we could possibly balance this, that a person that is accused of wrongdoing would have the ability in a way to be confidential if, perhaps we can have the investigation of the agency, but at the same time, if it's something that needs to be corroborated in case it is frivolous, and is there a possibility that we could balance out the request of the Sunset Commission so that whoever is being accused of something has the ability to have a fair hearing facing their accuser just as it would be anywhere else?
That's actually why the recommendation is to disagree.
No.
Yes. Yes.
No.
No.
How about now? There we go.
Oh, there we go.
So what we do now is we allow the person who's being accused to know who made the complaint so they can have the right to defend themselves against their accuser. That is what we mean by due process. What the Sunset Commission is recommending is that they don't get to know who their accuser was, which is against sort of the basic jurisprudence principles of this country, but also our particular statutes on both sides say that we have to have a signed written complaint. We don't accept anonymous complaints. Our statutes also require that we have to give notice of the complaint to the person who is accused. So if Sunset was going to do this, our arguments are under the law, we feel that the legislature has to specifically authorize us to withhold the identity of the complainant. Otherwise, we don't feel we have the authority under our current statutes.
Thank you. Okay. Any other questions? I forgot where we were. Do you have a motion, or are we just doing this?
We do have a motion.
Okay, so.
But we don't have a vote, so.
We don't have a vote either. But we're ready to vote. You ready to vote?
Go right ahead.
Yes.
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 Yes. So we agree with our staff to disagree with the Sunset staff on 3.1.
And on 3.1, we do have a motion on the floor. We'll start with Ms. Lynch.
Yes.
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 Yes, we have a unanimous vote on 3.1 from TALCB.
We open on 3.2, which only involves the commission. And our staff agrees with Sunset staff to authorize the Real Estate Commission to dismiss low-level complaints and delegate that authority to staff. So I would look for a motion, if there is one.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
I move that we agree with the Sunset Commission to authorize the Real Estate Commission to dismiss low-level complaints and delegate this authority to staff.
Second.
Motion and a second. I will pass to the board. to
The board does not
you don't
vote on
do
this issue.
This is just us. Okay, I'm sorry. So, any discussion? Start it. TJ.
Yes.
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 Yes. So we have agreed with Sunset Commission on 3.2. 3.1 is only, 3.3 is only you.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
Just to let you know, Christine has let us know the food is here
Yes.
if and when we're ready.
We got that text and I'm trying to push through as hard as we can.
Okay.
So we are on 3.3, and that is solely a TALCB issue that is related to authorizing the appraiser board to order refunds to consumers. The floor is open for a motion.
Madam Chair, I present a motion to authorize the appraiser board to order refunds to customers as presented by the Sunset staff recommendation.
We have a motion. Is there a second?
I'll second.
A motion and a second. Discussion? All in favor? We'll start on that end.
Yes.
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 And yes, the motion passes for 3.3 unanimously on behalf of TALCB.
Item 3.4 is the commission only, and Sunset staff and our staff agree that the commission should be directed to develop standard rules and procedures for handling each phase of the complaint process. I might add, most of our staff has already done this work. It's a matter of compiling it in the same place, but that's just to tell the staff they're still doing a good job. So I look for a motion.
Madam Chair, I move the commission agree with the Sunset staff report recommendation on item 3.4.
Second.
Have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion?
Yes.
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 And yes. So we agree with the Sunset and our staff. And the next one is both of us would open item 3.5, where our staff agrees with the Sunset staff to direct the commission and appraisal board to document and track non-jurisdictional complaints. I seek a motion.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
I move, that we follow the Sunset Commission recommendation to direct the Real Estate Commission and Appraiser Board to document, just on our end, the Real Estate Commission to document and track non-jurisdictional complaints.
Second.
Motion and a second. We'll hold and pass to the board.
We will open agenda item number 3.5, which relates to tracking non-jurisdictional complaints. Is there a motion?
Madam Chair, that I move to agree with the Sunset staff recommendation to direct the Real Estate Commission and Appraiser Board to document and track non-jurisdictional complaints.
Would you consider amending to not direct the Real Estate Commission, but just the Appraiser Board, please?
Sorry.
I'm sure they would appreciate it.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. I believe the amended motion as it relates to the Appraiser Board exclusively. Is there discussion? Council, is it clear enough for you on the record?
Yes.
We will start with Ms. Lynch.
Yes.
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 And yes, the motion passes unanimously from the TALCB board. Uh, 3.6 is, did you all vote on 3.5?
Yep.
I apologize. It moved so efficiently, I didn't recognize that.
okay.
3.6 is exclusively a TALCB matter. It relates to direct the appraiser board to prioritize the complaint investigations based on risk that each complaint poses to the public. Is there a motion?
Madam Chair,
Mr.
I would
Renfro?
move that this board agree with the Sunset Staff Board report recommendation, improve staff's proposed response information to item 3.6.
I have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion in 2 seconds. We will credit Mr. Bolton with the second. Discussion. Is there any need for discussion? Moving forward, we will start. Mr. Pena, let's let you start. We'll go down that direction.
Yes.
Mr. Bolton? Vote?
I'm sorry.
Yes.
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 See, I'm trying to keep you on your toes and keep you awake by moving things around. Ms. Lynch?
Yes.
Yes.
Mr. Renfro? Okay, so, and chair votes yes. The motion passes unanimously on 3.6. Staying with me, TALCB, we have agenda item number 3.7, also exclusively for our board. It is to direct the appraiser board to develop a plan to improve its investigative process and reduce the complaint resolution timeframes. Floor is open for a motion. Mr. Bolton, if you don't make one, I'm going to call for one in a minute. That would be our enforcement chair for any of you that think I'm picking on him.
I am doing some last-minute review, just, excuse me.
I'm going to make some general comments while we were allowing the board to do a last-minute review, that we have been in a process over the course of the last number of years to improve the performance of the investigative process on our side. It is detail-oriented in nature and requires some time. It is not as easily investigated as some things are, and so therefore the timing and some of the resolution timeframes are also set for us by federal oversight, and we have been receiving improving reports, and in fact the last 4 years have met the standard as it relates to meeting the federal guidelines. We have some internal goals that are shorter than those that we have not met, and we recognize the need to improve that. With that delay, are you ready?
Well, I'd like to point something out first that I would like to see that our response includes, as the comment from the Sunset Commission staff points to improve its investigative process and reduce complaint resolution and timeframes. I think we've dealt with the timeframe reduction, one, because we are meeting our federal requirements as well as trying to improve those. I want to add additionally that we have and continue to try to improve the investigative process. And yes, ma'am.
I didn't say anything. I'm not sure where that comment came from. Or anyway, can you make that in the form of a motion so we can get to discussion?
Yes, I can certainly try. I've botched it a couple of times today already, but I move that the board agrees in part with the Sunset staff recommendation. With the approval of staff's proposed change to include, because this performance standard is set and measured by federal law. I would also like to add that that the board will continue to review and set policy that will foster improved investigative process.
We have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Now we're open for discussion.
I just want to agree that with Mr. Bolton about the assumption that we have been doing this and that we will continue to do this as far as trying to improve the investigative process.
Yes, again, I think the comments that I made earlier, I believe what you're trying to do, Mr. Bolton, is to say, yes, while we've made improvements in the process, we recognize and identify that there are places that we can do better, and that this board is making a commitment to continue to improve that process. Is that what you're hoping for?
Madam Chair, yes, I agree with one exception, that it's not only that we are identifying these, but the public and the stakeholders are also identifying ways that we can improve the investigative process.
Okay.
Correct.
Okay. So is the motion clear enough, counsel, because it was lengthy?
Well, the motion is clear. I just want to point out that that language is already in the staff's response. So the motion would be sufficient to say that we agree in part with the sunset staff recommendation and approve of the staff response information.
One moment while we review.
I know where it is. I'm just looking at. So one issue that I have here, and maybe I should wait for discussion, but
That's where we are, so you're good.
okay. So the board staff has identified several issues contributing to higher complaint resolution timeframes, including intake, processing, length of investigation, attorney review, and processing. I think that the bullet points there hit. I think that I don't want to specify that it was the board staff that did this, because I think this has come from a variety of sources, and I think it should be recognized not only by us, but also the Sunset Commission, that we're listening to people as a board, as a committee, and as staff, and people are coming to us about things that they see that could be improved upon, and so I'd like to make that clear.
Okay. So again, I'm trying to interpret, I believe that we agree with generally what the staff has laid out. What I believe I hear you saying, Mr. Bolton, is that you want to be sure that, especially at an enforcement committee level, there is additional work that this board/committee expects to occur beyond what the staff's recommendations are.
Well, I think that's true in part, yes. But I would like to acknowledge that there are several places where we're seeing an opportunity to improve, and we're getting feedback to that event. And it's not just from the board staff, it's from stakeholders and complainants, from respondents. And so I just want to make that, I would hope that we could broaden that statement just a little bit, Madam Chairman.
So, counsel, can you help us, please? I think we understand what we're trying to do, but we're having difficulty putting it into a concise motion.
Yes, I think that the motion to agree in part with the sunset staff recommendation with the approval of the staff information, with the recognition that the board has identified several issues and will continue to work with stakeholders to improve its investigative process, including the litany of items that we've already included in the staff response.
Yes, as usual, counsel, you take my minutia and make it crystal clear. Thank you.
So for, just to be clear, so it's basically removing the word staff from that.
Yes, and adding the contribution of working with stakeholders.
Removing the word staff and adding the words board and stakeholders. Are you comfortable with that motion as stated?
Yes, Madam Chair.
And my second came from... Okay. I thought we already had a second, but maybe not. Go ahead. Do we have a second? Okay, let's get one. Ms. Lynch.
Second.
I apologize for getting us that far off we had discussion before motion, but all that being said, we got through it, and I think that's important. Are you comfortable with us going ahead to vote, Madam Chair?
Yes.
Vote, please. Start with Ms. Lynch.
Yes.
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 And yes. The motion passes unanimously for 3.7 on behalf of TALCB. 4.1 is an item that we need to both take up. It is to update and apply the standards across the board recommendations to the Commission and the Appraiser Board.
We'll open that, and Jamie's already read that, so I would seek a motion.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
I move that we adopt the Sunset Commission staff recommendation to update and apply standard across the board recommendations to the Real Estate Commission.
Motion is second?
Second.
Okay, wait a minute. It's to them. You going to get a motion?
Floor is open for a motion.
Madam Chair, I move that the board agree with Sunset Commission staff report.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Floor is open for discussion. Is there any on behalf of the board?
Our floor is open for discussion. Is there any on behalf of the commission? Okay, Commissioner Westcott, you want to vote?
Yes.
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 Yes. Commission votes in favor of the Sunset staff on 4.1.
4.1 vote. Mr. Olstry?
Yes, I'm sorry.
Olstry, sorry.
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
And yes, motion passes unanimously on behalf of TALCB. 4.2 is TALCB's action exclusively to authorize the Appraiser Board to establish advisory committees in rules as needed.
Madam.
Please. Madam Chair,
Mr. Renfro.
I move that the board agree with the Sunset staff report recommendation.
Second.
Second.
I have a motion and 2 seconds. We'll credit Ms. Lynch with the second since she was first in saying so. Discussion? Vote, Ms. Lynch?
Yes.
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 And yes, the motion passes unanimously for 4.2 for TALCB.
We're going to open the floor on 4.3 to repeal the Real Estate Commission and Appraisal Board's STSI annual and biennial reporting requirements. Real Estate Commission staff disagrees and has their recommendations to the same as 1.1. Commissioner Turner?
Madam Chair, I move that the commission disagree with the Sunset staff's recommendation, with the understanding that, as we've already discussed with regard to agenda item 1.1, that we are going to be placing additional, or we're recommending placing additional reporting requirements on the agency that would be equivalent to those found in the SDSI Act.
Madam Chair?
Wait just a minute. Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay. Now, Commissioner Arriaga?
I will respectfully disagree, as we discussed in 1.1, for the reasons that don't have to belabor again. I will be voting no on this recommendation.
Thank you. I'll go ahead and let you guys get yours on the floor.
Okay. Agenda item number 4.3, we are looking for a motion.
Madam Chair.
Yes, sir. Mr. Pena?
Board disagree with the Sunset staff report recommendation.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. The floor is open for discussion. There were some recommendations with 1.1. Are those routinely automatically part of that motion, or do they need to be stated individually as it relates to performance trends and timeframes?
Well, I think the question would be, does the motion approve of the staff proposed response? Was that the maker's intention?
It is.
That was the maker's intention. Was the second also intending?
Yes.
You have a, yes, that was the intention, so we have an amended motion, if you will, on the floor, including that language. So the floor is open for discussion.
So I'm just a little bit confused now. Would the motion include the recommendation for the reporting requirements that we made under 1.1?
Yes, it would.
Okay. Yes. Any other discussion on behalf of TALCB?
Do we have any discussion further on the motion on the floor?
I'll just real quick, to maybe put you at ease. The Sunset Commission's recommendation, item 4.3, was to discontinue our SDSI reporting requirements in our Chapter 1105 because the Sunset Commission was recommending that we be moved under the SDSI Act, and that Act has similar reporting requirements. Because we've already, as a commission today, decided to reject the Sunset Commission's recommendation that we move under the SDSI Act, but that we adopt all of the reporting requirements found in that Act, that renders this 4.3, it's superfluous, unnecessary. So we're still placing some more reporting requirements and some more things. And
If
I understand where you were coming from, but I'm trying to put you at ease as to why I made that motion.
If I made the motion, it'd be to accept fully the recommendation from Sunset. That's why I'm voting no.
I understand. Okay.
Are there any other comments? Yes.
I'd just like to say that even though as a commission and board, we are voting on these issues, they still have to be voted on by the Sunset Commission.
Oh, yeah. This is just our response. That's all it is. Okay, you ready to vote? Westcott?
Yes.
Yes.
No.
No.
Yes.
Yes. Motion carries on 4.3. Commissioner Wycliffe.
And,
Attorney Wycliffe.
The board, we do have a motion and a second on the floor. Discussion is open. Do you need any? Hearing none, we'll call for the vote. Ms. Lynch?
Yes.
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 Ms. Yanuzzi, I'm sorry, did I? Okay, thank you. And yes, for me, the motion passes unanimously as it relates to TALCB.
Okay, we made it through that. Let's see what we got to do next.
Madam Chair, I think the next step is who's going to meet to review the report and put our final sanction. And I think we had discussion in our area that maybe the Executive Committee should not meet.
Madam Chair,
Yes, ma'am.
I'm not sure at what point I could make a motion for what's coming up, the proposed motion at the end of the meeting, that I would like to move that the commission meets again sometime between now and the 16th, anybody that's available, so that we can all review the changes to the Sunset Commission before they're presented, instead of delegating our responsibility to the Executive Commission.
Executive Committee. And there's I have that motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, a motion. Mr. Westcott, did you have
Just
a comment?
as some discussion, I think we might take a little tip from the founding fathers here and possibly create a committee to review the staff response.
Or see if we can have a quorum. If we cannot have a quorum,
Well,
maybe.
I think what he means is if there are commissioners who are, if we want to take the review out of the executive committee hand and form instead a different subcommittee made up of different commissioners that aren't a quorum, that we could create a separate subcommittee that could include Commissioner Stevens, could include yourself. I'll remove myself from the process and voluntarily, so that way we don't have to have a full commission meeting. I would trust to put it in you all's hands. I understand the message, and actually I agree with it, and I'll go on record to say that too often things in front of this commission are delegated to committee that don't come before the full commission in a timely fashion or with enough information for us to absorb it, or whatever disconnect there is between what's happening at a committee level and what's happening at the commission level. It exists, and I want to acknowledge it, but I want to also acknowledge what Chart's saying, and that we could probably pass this off onto a small number of commissioners without requiring everybody to travel to Austin again.
It's just very difficult for 9 people to draft one document, you know.
Madam Chair, I agree completely. Everybody's very busy serving, even being here on one day is in the schedule, and what we have been discussing is grueling. But I think that we have been doing this for the last, like the biannual report, and the same thing happened with Sunset when it was first presented, and then again now. And if the intent of the legislation was to have 3 people, they would have specified that on the Real Estate Licensing Act, but instead there are 9 people, and I think that we should at least try to find out. And by Commissioner Turner, thank you very much for even thinking about that. It's not that I want to be personally present. What I'm thinking is, sometime in the future, your kids, my nephew, my niece, anybody else that wishes to practice real estate, they're gonna want to have something done in a fair manner. And all we're trying to ensure is that when these proposals are made, that the body that has been entrusted to make these decisions, that they can actually make them, instead of something as important as Sunset, which comes every 12 years, to come to a Friday afternoon. And then everybody is busy because we never thought about what was coming. All we have right now is, from what I heard during the executive committee, is that this has been set up at 4 o'clock on Monday. But I also know that we have days in between, and I am very flexible to figure out how we could make something work so that even though not everyone is going to be able to attend, just like when we have Texas Real Estate Commission meetings scheduled 4 months in advance, perhaps at least we have the choice and we follow the intent of the legislation.
I agree with you 100%. And there have been times when I have felt like I was in the dark, whether that was my fault or staff's fault or various committees' fault, as I've sat on this commission. And so I understand completely where you're coming from. I think in this instance, with this particular document, it was supplied to us in advance of this meeting. We had an opportunity to respond to our staff. I know Commissioner Leonard brought a marked up copy. We had an opportunity, and I think what's going to happen between now and submission is going to be non-substantive changes to this document to reflect the votes that we made today. And so the only review is going to be really making sure that it accurately reflects what happened today. So I agree with the spirit of your statement, globally applied, but as it applies to this process, that's one reason I'm willing to just pull back and say I don't need to review this document again. But I understand.
I think, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. There's only 3 points of contention, or 3 issues. One is 1.1, 2.3, and 4.3. I really believe that if, thanks to Secretary Turner, if he can step down, I think you and I and Westcott, the only ones that were in a minority in certain cases, that maybe we ought to be appointed this conference call if it's all right with the...
Well, we have a motion for it to be the full commission. We need to deal with that before we go into another suggestion.
You have a second on that motion?
I did.
Okay.
Any other discussion on that motion?
I'll call that question.
We're not going to vote on calling the question. I was going to ask General Counsel, is it possible to have a meeting of the full commission with meeting notice requirements?
Actually, we cannot. We won't be able to post it under the Open Meetings Act in time. So
Okay.
It would probably have to be just a committee or a working group committee that's appointed.
Okay, how many people could meet on Monday and it would not violate something?
4
Okay.
or less.
Okay, 4 or less. Okay, so let's go ahead and vote and see how it goes, and then we may go down in a blaze of illegality, or it may, no, it's not valid, but let's just vote and see what happens, okay?
Madam Chair, before we vote, may I also
Yes.
say that in the future, that we do not put ourselves in this bind, that we allow ourselves some flexibility, because on something this important, just like we have prepared for Sunset
hearings, and we have allowed in advance 2 days, and the same thing, in November and then in December, that we allow ourselves to do that, and that we have had a few days. I know it's tight, but we could have scheduled this yesterday. So, or just make the days make the motion in advance so that we provide notice in the event that we actually need it. And then if we don't, we can always cancel it, but we leave ourselves without an exit. And we owe it to the people of Texas. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
I move, in light of the information that we cannot legally meet on Monday, I move that we amend the motion by saying that we appoint 4 people to be in this review committee and meet on a conference call on Monday.
Are you willing to accept that?
I am.
Okay. So you guys understand that we now have and I'm just going without you, Jamie, I'm sorry.
That's fine.
That we're going to put together a committee of 4 that will meet on Monday at some point in time, at 4 o'clock, by conference call.
And would that committee be
Well, we're
executive committee
we're gonna
and one other member?
Well, I don't know. We haven't. That's what my secretary just wrote me a note and said, "Who wants to do that?" Okay, so who wants to do that?
I volunteer.
Okay, Arriaga, Stevens.
I volunteer.
Okay. I'll volunteer. And Leonard. And that's good enough. Okay. Are we good with that?
This is a conference call.
It's a conference call. You don't have to come to Austin. Okay. All right. You want to make that part of the motion? Did it be those 4 people?
Madam Chair, I move that the 4 people are
Leonard, Arriaga, Stevens, and Wukash.
Commissioners Arriaga, Stevens, Leonard,
Wukash.
and our chair, Wukash, that are able to partake in the staff recommendations in response to the Sunset Commission report.
Okay, great. Got a motion and a second. Let's hear it. Westcott.
Yes.
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 Yes. Okay, we have our detail done. What about you?
Okay, so we are off agenda, so I think it's probably appropriate that we go ahead and take up that issue while we are in that frame of mind. So this board also needs some kind of review capacity of this staff report prior to its delivery, and I need to know what the desire of the board is. But let the record reflect that I've lost a board member effective at 2:20 today. Ms. Lynch had to leave in order to be able to catch a flight and not be stuck in Austin for the entire weekend. So that being said, looking for a motion, if the board has one, as it relates to who would do the final review of this report on behalf of the board.
Madam Chair, as I'm fully confident in our executive committee, I would move that the board delegate authority to the executive committee to review and approve the final written agency response, incorporate the votes and responses made by motion at this meeting before submission to the Sunset Commission.
We have a motion. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. I will tell you that I have made myself available. I know that Ms. Lynch is willing to be available. I believe we have a party in our executive committee that is not going to be available by phone. Is that true, Mr. Renfro, or has anything changed?
No, that would be accurate. So, are we having discussion?
Yes, sir.
So simply with that in mind, it could be appropriate if we want at least 3 people to review this, then maybe we, in some form of a motion, deviate or appoint somebody in my place so that at least 3 people will have reviewed and this response.
That certainly is an option. My first comment would be, we can certainly, the executive committee can take it up even with 2 people if necessary, but certainly we welcome all input. Is there anybody that would be willing to volunteer? Is there anybody else who would like to volunteer? Hearing none, that's certainly an option, and certainly if the decision is to slightly amend the motion to account for an absence of an executive committee member, we could create an ad hoc committee, if you will, that essentially is made up of those 3 people.
So amended.
The second came from you, Mr.
Oh,
Bolton?
I just volunteered.
So the second that opened the discussion.
Oh, okay.
Since you volunteered, we'll go ahead and assume that your second is okay if they amend and
I
put your
volunteered.
name in place of Mr. Renfro if necessary. Okay, so we have a motion and a second. Any additional discussion? We'll start down there.
Yes.
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 Ms. Lynch is absent, and the board chair says yes, so it is a unanimous vote with the absence of Ms. Lynch noted. Now, I'm not sure, Chairwoman, are we on agenda item number 4 or 3?
Well, it's
Four,
a
I
really
guess.
good question.
I guess it's,
I think we're on 4, and the only thing that I know of that we need to add to a future agenda item would be to be sure in November we have a spot for the revised budget and reserve policies that the Budget Committee and the staff are going to work on for us for the November meeting.
When, Madam Chair?
Right?
What?
In some of our motions today,
Oh, okay, yeah.
we agreed that we would have revised budget and reserve policies ready for the November meeting. I want to add that to the agenda because we said we were going to do that, so we ought to do it. Anybody else have another agenda item?
Just a thought. Well, just a thought.
Yes, ma'am.
Since our November meeting is on Monday, if we want to be at the hearings, we have a day in between, which is going to be very inconvenient.
Your microphone's not on, and the guy in the back is sort of freaking out. I'm sorry,
Is it on now?
Commissioner Wilkinson.
Is it on now? Yes. Okay. Since we have the November meeting on a Monday, we have Tuesday, we have to go back home, come back on if we want to come to the hearings. Is there any way we could adjust our meeting?
It becomes room availability, I think. Is that correct, or is there something else?
Yeah, there is no other available facility for that. However, if you, depending on your specific, I would say if you want to make alternate travel arrangements like staying over or something, we certainly can look at those. Okay.
That's great.
Okay. Any other future agenda items?
Yeah.
Yes?
Didn't we know in advance that I thought that we had worked out in advance that it was going to be, that we were going to be here like the following day. I did not realize that we have a gap.
I have every day that week reserved for the Real Estate Commission, so I honestly don't know what's going on.
I did not realize, thank you, Commissioner Wilkinson, for bringing it out, because I did not realize that we have a gap of one day. That is really important.
We were talking about a workshop, and unfortunately, all I did was put in the Real Estate Commission every day for 4 days. You got something different in your calendar?
We talked about not being able to have our meeting on Monday because it's Memorial Day or Veterans Day.
Veterans Day.
Veterans Day.
Veterans Day.
Why don't we have it Tuesday?
Somebody in the room. What about Wednesday?
So Wednesday, the Sunset Commission has reserved, the commission itself has 2 days of meetings. That's Wednesday and Thursday. And so which day they will finally get to our testimony, it may be part of Wednesday afternoon and part of Thursday. We simply do not know. So we have to keep we have to keep both days wide open.
My concern is that by having a gap that we knew well in advance that we were going to be having those days, that it's going to stop some people from coming that would really like to have attended these meetings. And isn't there a way that we could meet somewhere else? We need to have that flexibility. On a Tuesday, and then we'd be available here in the event that that the sunset hearings occur on Wednesday or Thursday.
I think the real question is there any problem with us meeting in another place?
Yeah, can we notice, I mean, there are several,
The Austin Board of Realtors has rooms. I don't know who else.
there are
might have
Senate committee hearing rooms with closed caption capabilities all over the Capitol.
There are other facilities, and if that is the will of the board and commission, that you would like to look for other facilities for Tuesday, I think we discussed this at the August meeting, but we'll happily go look for alternatives.
Chairman,
Happily.
I'll just laughingly say, we have the room for Friday, and this has been so much fun. Why don't we you can come back together, and we'll just stack the meetings.
We could do the same thing. Let's just meet on Friday, if we have the room.
I don't remember what I've got on Friday.
Madam Chair, I'd be reluctant to make any changes in the schedule without
No.
Mr. Black's approval first.
That's true. This conversation is not available to my board. We have a meeting date and schedule, and you are not engaged in this conversation except for the levity purposes that I mentioned and offered.
I can do it Monday or.
I think that's a reasonable request. Doug, can staff look into alternate meeting locations
I do
and try
too.
to get us here on
I
Tuesday
can-
so
yeah.
that our out-of-town commissioners don't have to go back and forth?
Yeah, I agree. Absolutely.
We will certainly do that.
Thank you.
So y'all understand that we're going to do our best to find another location for Tuesday.
But
And
we-
staff will be in touch with us. Yes?
I think that it's just a matter of where, because
Yeah, I
in
think so.
Austin, yeah.
I think so.
Thank you very much.
Finding a room, yeah. And you finding a room.
Well, finding a room, and then, of course,
Finding rooms.
we try, both hotel rooms, all that other stuff. And then, of course, we would love to have, as people have come to expect, our, internet webcast and all of the other things. So that's the principal reason why we stick with this. But if we can find all those other alternatives, or even if we have to give that part up just to make it work, we will certainly float all of that to all of the policymakers. Okay?
Madam Chair, I will note that you and I both are scheduled to teach the broker responsibility train course on November, on that
That's
Tuesday.
what's on my calendar on that day.
It's on that Tuesday.
Okay. That's why I have the real estate commission on 4 days in a
Well,
row.
the Sunset Commission, review for us is every 12 years, and I think that I'd like to get a commitment from this, that we can actually have availability so that we do not have to go back to our places, because that gap involves a lot. It's a very long commitment, and I think that there's enough interest, and I think that we should be able to in Austin, Texas, that we should be able to find something, and it should not be an if, but a matter of where we could be able to meet.
Okay, sounds good. You have anything else?
So I need to do a couple of things as it relates to our agenda. The request for potential future meeting agenda items. I too have notation that we need an agenda item as it relates to the budget and the reserve policy. Are there any other items that the board would like to add to our November agenda? Hearing none, we don't have the need, it's my understanding, to discuss moving our meeting date, so I'm going to hope that you all will leave it where it is on that Friday, understanding that the Sunset Commission testimony is that Wednesday and Thursday. Is there any other action to be, that is necessary for this board?
I'm sorry.
I just move we adjourn.
Just hang on a minute.
Hang on just
That was just on behalf of the board.
Oh, on the board, okay. I just want to be sure,
Do we need a
Commissioners.
motion to make sure that we can make arrangements on this?
No, I think we're going to figure it out. I mean, I think that's the game plan. I want to ask you a question. You need to be sure, or I want you to be sure that your objection on 2.3 is properly iterated for staff. Was that the one that you said I want the record to show that I dissent? Did I mark it right? Okay, so just be sure you get with staff to make sure dissent is properly written. Okay?
It was just as it was stated.
Okay,
The
just
record.
as it was stated.
Yeah.
Okay, just want to be sure.
Thank you.
Christine has lunch in the cafeteria in the little open area, and we need to, if you want to eat, that'd be great, and pony up a little money for that. And I think you can make a motion, but I think it has to be facility available. And let me ask you this, if we find that sunset is going to be the afternoon of the Wednesday, could we meet earlier on Wednesday as a commission here if this room was available?
I'm available.
Okay. Just thought we might look at that. If we find that their meeting they're going to have our hearing at 2 o'clock, we could start this meeting at 8 o'clock. That'd put you here earlier. I know, Mr. Leonard, you'd have to spend the night.
General
Okay.
Counsel.
Are you okay with us working on that?
Yes,
Okay.
thank you.
On behalf of the board, is there any additional business for this board? I'll consider ourselves adjourned at 2:35.
Do we have any other agenda items? Most.
Just a question, when would we know the sunset schedule, do the hearing for us?
Tony says we don't know when we'll know.
Yeah, it is not likely that we will know the precise time that will be called until a few days before.
Could we, as an agency, request in writing just an estimate of when? I think that we'd be able to get a better idea, and then we can have some more efficiency on setting up this commission meeting.
Yeah, it's unlikely that we will even know before the day of the meeting, because we're literally at the mercy of the commission and when they're going to meet. So we can reach out and ask, but it's unlikely they're going to give us any specificity about when they're actually going to meet and take us up. There are several agencies up for a vote on their sunset recommendations before us, and then they will get to us. So I'll happily ask, but I'm highly skeptical that they'll get to that kind of specificity before the date of the meeting.
Okay, the meeting room is available on the 14th. That's Wednesday, so we're going to reserve it.
Great,
Okay,
thank you.
this room. Yes.
7 a.m.?
I was thinking 8 o'clock, 8 o'clock. I need a motion.
Move we adjourn.
No, you don't need a motion.
Okay, did you want to say something before I adjourn this group?
Oh, I was just going to say, if you meet on that Wednesday morning, we can have somebody monitoring the Sunset Commission, and if we're getting close, you can adjourn and go over there, and
That's
then
what
we can come back if we
that's
need
what I
to.
whispered to Doug. Maybe we could do
Okay.
that instead.
Yeah, we can have somebody monitoring it.
And then come back and continue the meeting on Thursday.
Thank you all so much.
Awesome.